All right. So I'm going to throw myself under the bus. Paul has been waiting patiently for me on the wrong link that I sent him. So that was completely my fault. Just in case, I'm sure everybody who's watching knows who you are, but just in case somebody accidentally stumbled into the wrong, YouTube video, can you, in your own words, give us the Paul Jessup story in a nutshell?
Sure, in a nutshell. Well, I'm a horror, fantasy, and science fiction writer. I've been doing it for about 20 years now. Most of my stuff is known for being very surreal and strange and off kilter, which is fun. I like that. So I've had quite a few books on the small press. My most recent one is this one. The Skinless Man Counts to 5. It's a collection of all my short stories from the last 20 years, well, all the really good ones. So, and that's going to be out next Tuesday. That's when it's live. I'm doing a book launch also next Thursday, I think. So, yeah, so that's exciting. And I had my one book last year, Glass House, which is a really weird haunted house story. So fun times.
Yeah, gotcha. So yeah, I'm actually going to get to Glass House in a little bit. So I was just double checking. So a good friend of mine, Brad, was letting me know that he was hearing double audio. So I was trying to see if it was my.
I can't hear you. Yeah.
So obviously, a lot of people love to write, or a lot of people want to write. Mm-hmm. Not everybody becomes a writer. What is your supervillain origin story?
Yeah, I've always written. Ever since I was really little, my mom, I would dictate to my mom stories, and she'd write them down, and I'd draw pictures to go with it. And then she would staple it along the sides, fold it in half and staple along the side so it looks like a real book. That was very important to me, that it had to look like a real book. And and oddly enough, selling it was always important to me too. When I was in kindergarten, I brought it in for show and tell, and a friend of mine wanted to use it instead. So I sold it to him for $1.
Nice.
Yeah, so that was technically my first author sale. It was a story about Care Bears or something like that. I can't remember exactly. So,
but you sold it.
Yeah, but I sold it, and it's been kind of the same thing ever since. And yeah, even in high school, I was pestering my friends with my stories and sending them to magazines and stuff like that. So it's always been kind of there. I had a small period where I was writing literary experimental stuff, but yeah, that I got bored of that quick.
Yeah, I think you had all that in the introduction of the Skinless Man Counts to 5, which is the short story collection that came out. So if anybody wants to see the long version of the villain origin story, that was a delightful read in and of itself. I really like that. Or I know a lot of people, there's a whole big thing on Twitter now about not reading prologues or introductions and stuff. Oh. I thought that introduction was totally worth it.
I was really happy with that. When I wrote it, I spent a long time working on it, and I was just so happy with it. Because originally I was going back and forth on including notes with each story. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, you know what, though? I'd rather just do this whole, an introduction that covers the gamut of everything. And yeah, it's been something I've been thinking about writing for a while. And I finally got it out, and I was very happy with it because I wanted to talk about my aunt and how she got me into horror and all this other stuff. And I've written about similar things in other blog posts and articles in the past, and newsletter articles. There's one I wrote a while ago called Key Book Candle, What It Means to Be Enchanted, that covers a lot of the same ground, but was more just in general about fantasy and science fiction writing and how it pertains to me. But this one, I really wanted to just cut to the quick on what horror writing means to me.
Yeah, I love that shout out to your aunt in the introduction there too. I was kind of wondering, is she the aunt that was in trouble with your mom for showing you all those horror stuff?
Yes. Yeah, the same one. Yeah.
The good aunt. Got it.
The good aunt. She was wonderful. Yeah, sadly she passed when she was 38. She had an embolism, which runs in the woman of my family. So.
Gotcha. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. So.
True. Still sorry to hear that, though.
Yeah.
So on a different note, so what is for people who are aspiring to know or become their own writers and know what a day in the life of Paul Jessup looks like? I know it's not your only job, but what's a normal day for you?
For me, most days I get up like pretty early, make coffee. I write for about like an hour in the morning before work. Um, and then I go for a short walk. After that, I work at my day job where I work at a university. For most of the day during my lunch break, I walk and then I write some more after that. And then after work, I relax for a little bit, go for another walk because I like going for walks. And then usually in the afternoon, I end up writing some more. It's usually how it goes. Some days I don't write quite as much and I end up reading more, depending on whether I've decided on my current project or not. If I'm in between projects, then I end up reading a lot, that sort of thing.
Well, you got to recharge.
Yeah,
I'm sure, like anything, writing people, you love to do it until it becomes a job sometimes.
yeah, pretty much, pretty much. That's the thing. I mean, there are days when it is a job, but I still love it, even when it's work. And some days it really can be work. Like getting the words out can just be like pulling teeth. I mean, I'm sure every writer out there has had those moments where it's just you can't seem to get it. It just doesn't want to work. And yet, when it does actually starts working again, it's just this wonderful feeling. So there's always a joy to it. And I don't get that with anything else that I do. Like even with because I make video games on the side and stuff like that for fun, and I don't quite feel the same joy with those like I do with writing.
Well, you said for fun, but I noticed that coding worked into a couple of your horror stories too there. So.
Yes, because that's been my day job for a long time. So that part's not fun.
Gotcha.
And the one, oh, she's. I'm thinking about the one you're probably thinking of is Summer Cannibals. Is that the one? The one
That was one of them, and I
Yeah.
think towards actually because for anybody who has well, nobody's read the book yet unless they got early copy because it, as you said, it doesn't come out. When does it come out again?
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
Mhm.
Make sure everybody knows that so they can go
Yes.
pick it up. But yeah, I had to make notes because it's less than 300 pages, but we get 24 stories out of it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there's quite a few. Oh, let me just see if I
Had quite
wrote
a
down.
bunch.
Oh, by the way, as a guy, who was in high school in the 80s, I did like the fact that you had a little shout out to Pascal in one of your
Yes.
stories as well.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was oh shoot. Post.
Post flesh, yeah.
Yes.
I was like, okay, I may not have written code, but I did write coding down to Summer Cannibals. So, but I thought you'd mentioned it in one of the other
Oh,
ones.
yeah, it was Post Flesh and there was Watch Me Burn
Was
with
it?
the Light of Ghosts.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so you snuck that in there a couple times. I did notice you have a few recurring themes. Not that all of your stories tie together, but mermaids came up a lot, rabbits came up a lot.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, the stories that the mermaids and stuff, those are pretty much from Glass Coffin Girls, the collection I had originally published in 2009, I think it was. And it was put out by PS Publishing, so it was available only in the UK. And
Gotcha.
Jeff Vandermeer did the introduction to that, which was really
nice.
cool. Yeah, I know. I was very excited about that. So, and it was a really nice introduction too, because he doesn't some some people when they write introductions to other people's books, all they do is just praise the person, but you don't get an idea of what the book's about.
Mhm.
And he doesn't do that. And I loved it because he just goes through and tells you what you're getting into. Basically, he doesn't say like Paul's awesome, you should read Paul's book. No, he just really critically thinks about the stories. And I thought that was cool.
I think it's kind of funny that you brought that up. There's another booktuber, Murphy Napier, and she had a whole thing the other day about blurbs
Mhm.
and how she like reads off this blurb and is like, doesn't help me. That tells me nothing about the book.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a big thing for her. I did have one question. I noticed these go all the way back to 2006. I was looking at the copyrights at the back, and
Oh, yeah.
I actually appreciated that you showed us where all those were originally printed.
Mhm.
Because I don't know if everybody realizes a lot of short story collections, it's not that just an author drops out some short story collections. These have been printed in magazines or other things over time.
Mhm.
And so if you wanted to go back and see the originals, it was a shout out to those. When you put a short story collection like this together, what is the curating process? Because I don't feel like you just took every short story you ever wrote and dumped it in a book. You might have, but But I
No,
feel like,
there's no way there'd be like 1,000 pages.
so how do
If I
you
did
decide
that.
what goes in and what gets left out?
Well, with this one, the main deciding factor is I wanted to do it be my horror stories only. Um, and that was important. And so I thought, well, that'll narrow it down. Well, it turns out, and I think I talked about this in the introduction, I actually went back and looked at it, and there were more horror stories than anything else that I'd published. And I was like, oh, I guess I write horror a lot more than I originally thought. And I was like, and even the ones that are science fiction and fantasy, they still had elements of horror in them. So that did cut out some, but not a lot. And then I went through and I knew my favorites, and I knew I had to put my favorites in this one right away. I knew exactly which ones my favorites were, and they just had to go in. And then there were a few that other people said they were their favorites, and then those had to go in. I knew like some of my friends really liked, and some people that weren't friends. Sometimes I just get emails from fans like saying, "Oh my god, I love this story," and so like that stuck in my mind. So even if it wasn't one of my favorites, I knew it was somebody else's favorite, so I put that in too. And those were like deciding factors. So that really helped narrow it down a lot. And then the first short story that opens up the collection was one that I wrote a long time ago, 2008 or 9. I think it was in the last issue of Fuego's Wainscot. And it was a story I loved to pieces, and it didn't seem to get a ton of traction when it was published. And then one year I just posted a link to it on Halloween saying, oh, here's one of my horror stories. And like Scott Nicolay, who does the Outer Dark podcast and stuff, like a big person with the weird horror, that sort of thing. Love his stuff. He was like, this is great. And he started posting about, this is weird. This is super weird. I'm like, yes, somebody gets it. Somebody got this one. And so I was like, I'm going to start it off with that one because I just love that story so much. And I thought it really needs to get more attention. And then the story ended it was, of course, the titular story, which was like the last story I'd published that went in the book, which was published in 2022, I think. I had stories published after that I actually really wanted to put in there, but because of when it was being put out and the contracts with the magazines, they wanted at least like a year or two between publications. So I couldn't put those.
Yeah, they want their little exclusivity, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, which there's one. What was it? It's originally it went in soul jars, and so if I do another collection, I really want to put it out there. But it's also not horror, so I probably wouldn't fit in this anyway. Called The Last Dryad, which was really good too. That I wish I could have put in this, but
Well, here's a quote you might like because I mentioned, especially those last couple of ones, Skinless Man and I think it was Post Flesh, very much lean sci-fi, but this still has that element of horror. Nat Cassidy had said that every good story is a horror story anyhow. It's like anything can be a horror story if you don't. He said even like Sleepless in Seattle would be a horror story if they don't get together at the end and they live their lives, in loneliness. Horror is just the fact that you have something to lose.
Right.
So, but yeah, I especially liked Post Flesh was really, really good. Skinless Man was, and there was a Skinless Man. There was a couple of yours where I really thought I can totally imagine these, and I'm dating myself here, as an Outer Limits episode, as a Twilight Zone episode, as a Tales of the Crypt episode.
Yeah.
You had some that, even though some are like super short, some of them have that basis. Like I could see this being a 30-minute episode somewhere.
That would be awesome. I grew up on the Twilight Zone. Every year, New Year's, they'd do a whole marathon, and I would just watch it. And then when we got our first VCR, of course, I recorded it so I can watch it anytime I wanted. Same with Outer Limits, And I also grew up I think I mentioned this in the introduction. One of my favorite things was a collection of classic horror short stories, which also kind of have the same feel to them, to the old Twilight Zones and stuff. So that actually means a lot to me that you could see these as being an episode of one of those, because that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I don't think what was that one? I don't think the House at the End of the World, or no, actually, House at the End of the World might be able to.
Yeah.
Light like knives dragged across the skin. I don't think that would be able to make, at least not on network TV.
No, not the ending, especially.
Yeah, that one got a little deep. And I'll have to say,
yeah,
one of the things, and I'll just tell this to everybody out there, I haven't put the review up on this book yet. I'll be putting a review up on Goodreads and YouTube and all that. This one, spoiler alert, I'm kind of giving 4 stars to. There are some that I have a me problem, and that was one of them because I can't do once you get around the eyes.
Oh yeah.
Anybody coming at somebody's eyes with a wooden spoon, for instance, in one of your stories. Yeah, no, I'm done with that one. I don't want to read that.
I get it.
But there were a lot of yours that I think were like the 4 or 5 stories, which is why I'm giving it as a collection of 4 overall. But there was also a lot of 4 or 5s in there that balanced that out.
Yeah.
And like I said, the ones that weren't that high for me, a lot of it I know is a me problem. I can do horror left and right. I tell people all the time, my daughter and I, we went to Canada and went to the quote unquote scariest haunted house in the world. And my daughter and I went through that. And when we came out, the guy at the end, he just looks like, well, you two aren't going on the YouTube channel because we just didn't react.
Right.
The jump scares and stuff, they don't do anything to us. But yeah, you get anything to do with like Hostel. I saw the preview for the movie, trailer for the movie Hostel, and I'm like, I can't watch that. Nothing around my eyeballs.
So the funniest thing about that is I'm actually with you on that 100%. And some of those stories I wrote that way because it bothered me to write them. And because it's horror, I'm just like, I have to go. Like the first story, The House at the End of the World, that one I thought was too much for a while.
I actually didn't think that one was too bad.
The ending.
I get the ending, but yeah,
okay,
that
so
one
that actually to the point of where I like, did I go too far with this? This bothered me, like in a way I couldn't even explain. And so like I was actually talking to my daughter about it because she's a horror fan, and she actually was like, yeah, no, this is freaky as all hell. And for her, it was because it was this loss of autonomy that she thought was scary. And I was like, yeah, I kind of get that. It was a loss of autonomy, but also the face that, the fact that they're cutting her face off and it was the dad. And it was just like, but I get what you're saying though. Like the eyes, I mean, there's certain things that bother me as a reader that I wouldn't like, that I actually went towards in this book.
Oh, don't get me wrong. There's people that will probably love it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But I wanted like not all of them, but there's some of them I just really wanted to push my own to see if I could do it, just like, because it bothered me so much and scared me so much. I was like, there's something there. If it does that to me, I need to figure out why, and then when I am done with it, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do that again. And then of course, at some point I eventually do it again. But like, especially with movies too, like I can't, the eye thing doesn't bother me. Well, it does bother me some, but what really doesn't bother me is like Hostel kind of, or the Saw sequels. Like the first Saw movie is fine, but like after
the first Saw wasn't that bad. I like that one.
It's something about it, the way they do the gore in it. It just makes me, I can't watch it. It makes me, I have to look away. And yet I can watch Suspiria just fine. And Dawn of the Dead and that sort of thing, maybe because it's just so over the top ridiculous, but it's like the way those are Eli Roth films are filmed, it's not my thing. Yeah.
I really liked the first Saw movie. I had no problem with that, but it went downhill fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have to say, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's not even worth it though. It's like the stories weren't good enough for the parts that made me not watch the screen and be squeamish, Yeah,
I was just going to say that it tasted like the sea. That's the story I'm not rereading.
Oh, yeah, that one too. That one
got a little dark.
But actually, the interesting thing is that one, I felt like it went too far in it the same way that House at the End of the World went too far, which is funny. I almost said Cabin because like I actually wrote House at the End of the World before Cabin at the End of the World existed. So I was just like, oh, the titles are titles. So I wasn't offended by that. I'm like, oh, he stole that from me. I'm just like, no, he probably didn't even know my short story existed. Most people did. It's just, but I had the feeling it's like the same thing, is that sense of loss of control, but also not facing reality when something horrible is happening. That bothered me. Like them turning and seeing something horrible being done to themselves and then turning and then just walking away and accepting a fantasy instead. And so they both kind of end in the same way, and they both kind of bother me in the same way. But I think are important stories, even though they bothered me. I think I had to do them. A friend of mine, actually, she read It tasted like the sea, and found herself crying at the end on the bus, and said that she loved the story even though she hated it at the same time.
Now, don't get me wrong. Emotionally, I
Mm,
got it. I liked the very end of it. I liked the way you wrapped it up.
mm.
I just the parts I had to wade through to get there, the
Yeah.
dark parts. You know what
Yeah.
parts I'm talking. I'm not trying not to spoil for anybody who
Oh, I
wants
know
to read the
exactly the
collection,
part you're talking about.
but
Because
yeah,
yeah,
there is.
it bothered me too to write it. I just like, am I going too far with this? I actually thought that when I was writing it. I know the part you're thinking of.
It got
Um,
printed though, so somebody was cool
Twice.
with it. Yeah. Well, I'm just. I mean, this one obviously is a collection, but it got
Yeah.
that initial publication.
Oh
One
no,
thing I
no,
did
no,
want to.
oh, no, no, 3 times then. Yeah, with this collection. So originally it was in Glass Coffin Girls. And that
Oh,
collection
that
was
was the
completely,
collection.
yeah, that collection was completely unique. That was done entirely from postscripts. And I want to do another one like that sometime because that was fun because all those stories are related. They're all stories about basically folklore and stuff, but told like in a strange sideways way. I was really influenced for those stories by Kelly Link as well as Aikman and stuff. Um, and so like it was published there, and then that story got republished in Apex magazine, I think. Yeah, it was Apex magazine, and then finally got published again in the Skinless Man Counts to Five. So
Oh, nice.
yeah.
It's kind of funny you mentioned Kelly Link. I'm reading Book of Love right now, so
Oh, I just finished that. Wonderful.
it's all over the place. It's a little weird for me. I'm so it's I get
Oh,
to a part. I'm like, oh, I love this book. It's a 5, and then I'll be reading another part of this book. It's like, I'm not so sure, and then it's like, oh, it's a 5 again.
well, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
it's her
all over.
first novel too, so
Yeah.
I wonder if there's some novel growing pains there, but I don't know. I'm not Kelly Link, so, and she's well, I mean, yeah,
Well,
she's
it
fantastic.
was super. What's the word I'm looking for? People are anticipated. People were excited for this book. So,
Me too. Yes, I actually went to the library, had it on hold, and they said it's time to pick it up. And I went there, and it wasn't there. And I'm like, well, where is it? Somebody, one of the librarians, had set it aside, hoping that I would just give up and not look for it, and that she would take it home with her.
sneaky little bastards. I see how
Yes,
they. You
yes,
think
it's
librarians are nice? That's wrong.
no. And so, like the minute my like 2 weeks was up, I couldn't renew it. It was like, nope, there's that person was waiting for it. Just I had to read it right then and there. So I was also reading House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher at the same time. So I had to set that
Okay.
aside to finish the to pretty much speed read through some parts of it because it's a very long book, Book of Love. So I could bring it back to the library in time.
Yeah, I've been listening to the audiobook. It has taken me a while.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I could see that. It's a very big book. I do not write big books. So
I like. I don't know. It's partly is how it's written because I remember reading Name of the Wind, which is a decently
oh
thick book,
yeah.
or heck, a Swan Song by Robert McCammon.
Oh yeah, that's a good.
That's one of my favorites. But that thing's always. I remember it was like over 1,000 pages. Halfway through that book, it says book 2, and I'm like, holy crap!
Yeah, those two don't really feel like it.
But
They don't.
they seemed they just like flew by.
Yeah.
Other ones,
Yeah.
sometimes I get like a 200-page book, and I'm like, I'm not done yet.
Well, I mean, Stephen King's It to me at times fled by and at other times went really slow. And so I'm just
Sure.
wondering like if there's some I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, McKinnon's books always like they're big, but they just zip right by easily. So
Yeah, I got to read some of his new stuff sometime. I'll be honest, I thought he had just given up writing, or
mhm.
because like after the like early '90s, he just kind of disappeared for a while.
Yeah.
But because he wanted to get out of the horror genre and write his own stuff, and he just couldn't get anybody to pick it up.
Well,
We're
that's
getting off topic. We're talking about you.
that's fine. I like talking about it. This happens whenever I'm on like podcasts and stuff. I end up talking more about other writers than myself, but I think that's wonderful because I just like talking about other writers, especially lesser known writers. So,
Like McCann.
like, he's actually lesser known these days.
Well, this is true. There's
Yeah,
like I'd
Generation
say
Z doesn't know him.
if you're old enough, if you're old enough, late '80s, early '90s, I mean, it was like King and McCammon. That was like
Mhm.
heck, half the time they were almost writing the same books.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
but
Straub too.
so that was crazy.
Yeah.
So getting back to you though, I did have one question because I don't talk a lot of people who do short stories. Short stories are interesting to me because sometimes they can be a complete story, and sometimes it can be much more a moment in time.
Mhm.
Like, so, what was the one I was thinking of? The one you've had a couple that just kind of ended, and I get why they ended. But for instance, Winterlight, it really feels like there was going to be a next moment, and you're done. How do you know when a short story is finished?
Okay, so Winterlight's a very interesting example of that because I rewrote the ending like close to 12 times for that one. And I actually sent it to my friends and things like that, and they were reading and helping me go through it. Like especially some friends of mine that are really very astute when it comes to my writing, especially. And one just finally got back to me and goes, "Okay, you know what you're going to do? You're just going to end it right here." And I'm like, "I don't know about that. That's kind of abrupt." And so like I cut it out and I read it and then I set it aside. I'm like, "All right, well, I'm just going to just set it aside because I still had the rest because that one was unique to this collection." And it actually is one I've been working on for years. And so I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to set it aside for a bit. And then if I still can't get it to work, then I'm just not going to put it in the collection. And then I went back and read it. I'm like, okay, yeah, actually this does work when it ends abruptly like that. Somehow it works. Because before I was explaining too much by the end. And I was explaining all the stuff that was going on. And they're right, it was better just left unsaid. As hard as it was for me to do that.
Well, I don't know if you did this on purpose or if you've reread it since you did it. And of course, I read the arc, so I'm assuming the book's probably going to be all the same books in the same order.
Yeah.
But Winterlight trails off, and it immediately is followed by Sun Sorrow that starts in the middle of a sentence. And I'm like,
Yes.
wait, are these supposed to be connected? It took me a second.
No, they're not supposed to be connected,
No,
but
I got that.
that was a bit of a practical joke on my half.
Okay.
I did that on purpose, yes.
Okay, so you did do that on purpose.
They were two different, like they were published completely and written completely different times. It was done on purpose. Another reason why it was done on purpose too was because that was leading into that felt like a good bridge story between the stuff that was mostly contemporary realism towards the stuff that was getting more sci-fi and fantasy.
Gotcha.
And Sun Sorrow was kind of more like it's a dying Earth story. So, yeah. And that was originally published. I wrote it actually originally for Silvia Moreno Garcia's collection. What was it called? Swords and Mythos, which was like sword and sorcery plus Cthulhu mythos. And that was written specifically for that one. So
nice. So the one that got me, because at first it was going, what the heck is going on here? And then I saw what you did at the end. Wire Rabbit. That, especially at the beginning, I'm like, I can barely read this, and I know why you did it. But then I got towards the end, I'm like, oh, that's what we're doing. Okay.
That was really hard to write. That was really the wording of it was so difficult. I actually wrote it one way and I went back and I had to rewrite it and change all the language so it worked and meshed like that. And that was a tricky one because I wasn't sure it worked or not. But it felt like it had to be written in that specific way. Like that story it was a story about these feral kids and they had to be written like this. And then it had to end like that way. Yeah, it was a very complicated story. Obviously they're not feral at the ending, but that's a whole, I don't want to spoil anything for people because it is kind of like, I wanted the ending to open like a flower, if that makes sense.
Right. And like I said, it does work by the end, but when you're, like we said, when you're the first few pages into it and you're like, oh my goodness, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah. Some people actually compared it to Born of Man and Woman, I think it is. There's another one written kind of in a similar way, but not quite as extreme as that. Yeah. It's an older one. I can't remember who wrote it. I want to say Bradbury, but I don't think it was Bradbury. Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah. So like, yeah, it was tricky. But Glass Coffin Girls was a very experimental collection, and that was like one of the centerpiece stories in it. Probably the one that it was just like, let's just see how far I can take this, because I was approached by Peter Crother of PS Publishing, and he was just like, hey, how would you like to do a collection of unique stories? You can do whatever you want. I'm like, all right. And so like I just took that as carte blanche to just try anything, and that was one of the stories I tried. And I think it works, but oh wow, I actually had nightmares writing that because it was just such a thing to write. I wouldn't say chore. No, it was a chore. It was hard to write. It was really hard to write. That was where writing felt like a job.
I'm going to ask you this because I just watched a podcast with Emily Inkpen the other day, and I apologize, I can't remember the other lady's name. We're talking about the fact that, for instance, in editing, not having a deadline or not knowing what somebody wants specifically drives them crazy. It's like, tell me what you need. So does having carte blanche, did that make it easier, or did that make it like, okay, what am I going to write?
It made it easier because when he said I had carte blanche at the time, I'd been working towards like this way of writing. Because it was like 2008, 2009 when he approached me about this. It was around the time I got approached by Jason Sizemore for doing Open Your Eyes, the novella through Apex Books. And that was like very much a science fiction horror surreal story where I was also pushing a lot of boundaries and stuff and going very experimental magical realist with it. But these ones I wanted to make them contemporary because I was working on stuff similar to that, like a contemporary fantasy, weird kind of a thing. This is before weird fiction was weird fiction, before Jeff Vandermeer wrote the Weird Compendium and all that stuff. But a lot of other people were doing it. There was like something in the air or the water at that time. And so I was like, all right, I want to do that. And I was reading, like I said, Kelly Link, but also, oh gosh, I can't remember her name, but she wrote the story, Ava Fights an Alligator. Vampires in the Lemon Grove was a collection of hers. And I'm blanking on her name. And I'm going to kick myself later. And, but she also did something similar with that. And all the writers of Tin House, there's a lot of women writing at Tin House. They were also writing kind of like surreal fairy tale stories. Theodore Gross also did some stuff like that. Theodore Goss. So I wanted to do that. It was going to be my fairy tales collection. So I just went with my own kind of way. And it would have been nice to have guidance, sure, but I kind of just went with what my gut told me. And it kind of, Karen Russell, yes, thank you. Yes, Karen Russell. And yeah, it kind of shot myself in the foot a few times with what I was doing because it was so hard to stick with that thing. I'd get ideas for doing other stuff, but I was like, no, I've got to finish this collection, and I had to like narrow it down and do it. I mean, nobody was making me do it that way, but I wanted to do it that way. I don't know. Right. And I think some other time I'm going to do something else because I'd also like to do another collection of stories, short stories and novellas that are all like around a similar theme or something, which I did also with Close Your Eyes, which was a collection of like novellas and short stories too, all around like the world of Open Your Eyes, but something more fantasy oriented would be kind of fun, like walking through like short stories that walk through a fantasy world or something like that at some point. I'd like to do that. It's kind of nice actually when I have carte blanche. I tend to go kind of nuts when that happens.
That's a lot. Yeah, there's no wrong answer.
Yeah.
I think it would be very boring if every writer was the exact same. I mean, let's face it, we'd only need one.
Yeah, but I mean, that's also though too, when I found when I'm working with a writer or an editor, with an editor that's really good. I love it because like they can help me like give form to things. They can find ways to improve it. So it's like a million times better, like structurally and everything else. I'm one of those writers I think that needs a good editor, to kind of like rein them in a little later on. And both Mark Teppo and Darren Bradley, who are the ones for Underland, I've worked with them in the past before working with their books on Underland. They're both like amazing editors that really get what I'm going for and can really push it towards really interesting places. And so whenever I get their notes back, I'm just like, I know I'm going to be in for something that's going to just make this so much better. And that's like when I was doing Glass Coffin Girls originally, the titular story, it wasn't the titular story. It was the titular story, Glass Coffin Girls. I sent that to Mark Teppo, was just a first reader because we were friends at the time, and he made a suggestion of that one that was so perfect, and because the short story started a completely different way, and he said, "No, you need to cut that out and start it here," and he was right. It was perfect, the perfect beginning for it. Um, which I think was that one was like with mom being angry and cleaning her gun because she hated Emily, and I'm like that's the crux of the story. Anything before that didn't work, you know. So it's like really good working with editors that can really just help shape a story and make it better.
Gotcha. Well, I know Glass Coffin Girls that actually looked to see if I was like, I swear, it's like I thought I read that one and I did. That one was pretty interesting. I like that one.
Mhm.
It was, like I said, it was a little weird, but I think a lot of horror stories are.
Mhm.
And let's face it, you talked about Jeff Vandermeer. As someone who's read Bourne, if he'd written these after Bourne came out, they probably would have seemed normal because that
It's
book is
true.
weird.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing, like, Glass Coffin Girls came out, yeah, it was right when the weird thing was starting to happen with the Outer Dark and everything, but it hadn't happened yet. It was, like, in the nascent phase on it, and so, like, it didn't really get a lot of coverage on, like, the blog review blogs because at the time, book blogging was huge.
Mhm.
Um, but then I found out later that other writers read it and loved it and were influenced by it, which was just that is very like a huge compliment,
Exactly.
because I thought nobody cared about it. I was like, I thought it was like, oh, and it was like a short limited edition, 500 copies, that sort of thing too. So I never even found out like if it sold out, how much it sold, like how well it did or anything like that. Cause it was like, a collector's edition basically. Um, but it made me really happy to hear that people not only liked it, but were influenced by it and wrote stories in similar styles and stuff. I'm like, that's okay. That's a huge compliment. Especially because that book was influenced by a lot of other writers.
Well, I was looking feel like Glass Coffin Girls is one of those ones that they would have to not screw it up. But I feel like that's one of the ones that could be like an Outer Limits episode or something like
Mhm.
that if
Yeah,
they did it right.
yeah.
I also feel like they could screw it up. No, you
Yeah,
can't
that's
say
a
that about
tricky
any
one.
book.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because it's like a balancing act of everything that's going on
Right. And
at
then
the
there's
end.
a lot that's in his head, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It
Some of the
reminds
things trying to get
me,
across.
have you ever read Aikman's short story, The Swords?
No.
Okay. Well, he writes very, very strange. Like if you read his stuff, you'd be like, "Oh, Paul, your stuff is actually very normal and boring." Well, it's a short story about this guy who goes to see a stripper, and when she strips, her main trick is people push swords into her, and that's it. Like all these swords, and so he's like becomes obsessed with her, and he takes her to his room one night, and she lets him do it, and she actually just the swords go right through her. It's not a trick or anything, and that's the end.
Oh, okay.
And it's very unsettling because you don't know what happens. And at the end of the story, this character is just thrown around the bend because he doesn't know what's going on, and he's like, yeah, it's really interesting. And then there was this TV series. Oh gosh, I can't remember. It was in the '90s. It was very like Outer Limits, Twilight Zone style, but it was also based on real short stories and stuff. I think it was done in Canada. I could be wrong
I
about
don't think I
that.
know that one.
I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's like you can watch it on YouTube now. But they did a version of the swords and they completely ruined it. Hold on, I'm going to Google Swords TV episode. See what happens. Um, okay, no, it's telling me there's a TV series called The Swords, but that's not it. Um, The Hunger, that's what it was called, The Hunger. And it was
Okay.
based similar to the movie, I think.
Hmm.
And I know they actually did short stories by Gemma Files and stuff too. So which is really cool, Gemma Files. But that story, they just completely ruined it. Halfway through, it becomes a romance.
I feel like sometimes they feel like they just have to do that in Hollywood for some reason.
Yeah, but it was the funniest thing was it was a romance, but it was obviously a reference to the movie True Romance and also a reference to Badlands, the Terrence Malick movie. Um, And so they had that same like xylophone music playing in the background. I don't know if you've ever seen either of those, Truemancer.
Not off the top of my head, but I can totally see that if you're getting a sword stuck through you, xylophone music is what you want playing in the background.
But it was like a reference to those movies, and it's
Hmm.
funny because like somebody is reviewing that episode saying, "I don't get the xylophone music." I'm like, "Actually, I see what they're doing. It just they ruined the short story though." Why did they do that? So I have a feeling that if somebody did Glass Coffin Girls, there's a chance that it might go that way. It might ruin it.
Yeah.
It's a long
Never
way.
mind. Skip that whole idea.
It's a long way to get back to that. But I mean, if it's the right people did it, like if it was on Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone, it might work. I think he could do it.
Yeah,
Right?
you got to get the right director in there.
Yeah.
So somebody who actually liked the story and is not just being paid by a producer to put it out.
Yeah. Or Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. He had some really good episodes.
Guillermo's so weird.
Yeah.
I read the Strain series. I have to say, I loved the first 2 books. I only didn't like the 3rd book because I didn't like how he made their origin story.
Oh,
Have
yeah.
you read the entire trilogy?
Yeah, I think they didn't need an origin story, actually.
Yeah. And they definitely didn't need one where it was all, atomic. Like, okay.
That was
Guillermo. He goes off the rails. What can we say?
Yeah, and you got to forgive it when it's him. What was it? I was reading a newsletter by Elizabeth Bear, and she talked about author points. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before.
I haven't, but I have talked to Bear before. So.
Yeah, so it's like, when you're reading a book and you get to a part where you're like, this doesn't work. If you know the author and can trust them, they have author points they can spend.
Oh, gosh.
So you keep reading. But if you don't know the author and you don't trust them, then you're just going to put the book down. So she's like talking about building up author points. How do you build up author points? So I thought that was really a clever way of doing it. Yeah.
I'll have to tease her about that. I do like that though. That is I see where she went there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's me talking about other writers again. See?
Yeah. But it's a good conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which, I enjoy that. I'm bringing up Glass. Well, first of all, I'm going to say it right. Glass House. I keep wanting to say Glass Castle.
That's
fine. Glass House. I'm going to bring this up for a main reason. First, I'm going to apologize. I did not finish it. I did start it. We just got back from Iceland, and I thought I was going to have all this lovely time to read, but I made a mistake and took my wife. Mm. And she's very much one of those, let's get up at 6 a.m. and hike every mountain, crawl through every ice cave, look for every waterfall. So by the time I got home every night, I just crashed. Plus 6-hour difference, jet lag is a real thing.
Yeah.
But I did start it today. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because obviously I'm not far enough in to know how that's going to end, but your writing, your prose in that book, I'm absolutely loving. So if you wanted to talk to anybody about, that was just last year's book, make any comments about that you want, bring that to their attention, because I'm definitely going to be finishing this book, and I'm loving it.
Yeah, that's the prose I'm most proud of. I'm so happy with the prose of that book. I spent so long working on it that it took about 5 years to write originally. Well, the first time I wrote it, it was like in a rush in 6 months. And then I set it aside for a while, for like a year. And then, because at the time, horror was not where it is now. That was still when horror was just like, nobody's going to publish it, not even the small press. You're very lucky. You only get published if you're a big name. And then you have to publish under like urban fantasy, which that book would not fly as urban fantasy. So I set it aside for a little bit. I went back to it, and then I didn't really clean up the prose much, but I messed with the structure a little and deepened a lot of it too, and like tried to make it make more sense and stuff. And then when I got it to Teppo and Darren Bradley and stuff, and they went through it, it was kind of funny because they actually had me remove some of the stuff I added in because I'd explained too much of what was happening. And I think that would have ruined it. I was too much in love with the history of the house and stuff. But the real interesting thing is I wrote it that way on purpose. Have you ever read a short story by George Saunders called Victory Lap?
Don't think so.
It's a great short story. If you ever get a chance, read it. It's about... Actually, I'm not going to explain it because it's better if you go to it and you don't know anything. Okay. But it and Black Phone do a similar thing where they take you on a thing where you think is going to be this specific kind of horror, and then they just turn it on its head and inside out. But the way it's written in a very, very close third person, a stream of conscious. where you really get to know the characters and understand them. And I wanted to do that. I like loved it, and it was just so well written and so easy to read, and you get to know the characters so well. And I was like, I've got to do that for Glass House. I had to at the time. I didn't have a name for it yet. I just had to do it, and I think it really pays off. And I haven't really been able to write. I need to write something like that again because it's just such an interesting effect. It really, you know the characters in such an intimate way, but it's not as far out there as James Joyce, or Victor. Um, what's her name? Virginia Woolf, where they took stream of consciousness to the point of where it just kind of goes overboard. It's like a compromise between the two, and I think it works very well. Where you get the character's voice and you understand the character, and it's, you know what I mean, and you get attached to them.
Yeah, I read James Joyce for a book club once, and that's one of the few books I've ever DNF'd. I'm like, no, I can't do it.
I like his prose when it's taken separately than his book. I mean, I know a lot of people love him and thinks he's amazing. And my kind of writing, you'd think you must love Ulysses or Finnegan's Wake. I've never finished them. I've read bits and pieces. I love the ending of Finnegan's Wake, the way it's written, but I just couldn't. It's something about them just hasn't clicked with me yet. I'm sure they'll click with me someday. Like when I first read Peridot Street Station, I couldn't read it. It like took me 5 tries, and when it finally clicked, I loved it. But so some books are like that. The same with Delaney's Dahlgren. I think a lot of people, they read my stuff, think, oh, you're going to love that, and I just couldn't really get into it for whatever reason. Even though I love the writing of it, there's just something about it that feels like it's at a distance. Even though I love Nova, I think it's like one of my favorite stories of his. Like that Einstein intersection too is one I just couldn't get into. There's something, I don't know how to put it. There's something about it that there's a wall between it and me that I can't seem to scale.
Gotcha. No, I mean I think that's perfectly acceptable though, because I know a lot of people. There's a lot of books that Catcher in the Rye is a classic. I know people that love that book.
Yeah.
I couldn't get through it. I told somebody I read, like, and of course, I never want to critique too harshly a book I didn't finish because I don't know how it would have wrapped up. But just getting through the first part of it, I keep telling people it's like I'm reading a book written by an 8th grader that dropped out at the 3rd grade. I just couldn't get through it.
Yeah. The voice rubbed me the wrong way too. I know that's what some of the people love about it. And it's funny because I do like some of Salinger's other stuff, like Franny and Zoe and his short stories, especially Banana Fishbones. That's a disturbing story. I'd say that's pretty terrifying. But Catcher in the Rye didn't work for me either. I read it all the way through because my one friend in high school was like, oh my God, you have to read it. This is amazing. He kept calling other people phonies and stuff. And I'm like, okay, I read it. I'm like, no, it's not for me. It's just not my thing. He also loved Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. And I read that all the way through for him too. And I get why it's good, but it didn't work for me overall. Yeah,
I'm trying to remember if I read that one or if it was just on my to be read list now.
Yeah.
I went through a classical authors phase for a while. Sometimes I can't remember if I read something or if it was just on the list.
Yeah. And it's funny because I liked On the Road and a lot of that kind of stuff. But then maybe it's when the structure gets too out there. I tune out for some reason or something. Maybe that's it. When they go too kind of hog wild with the structure and it doesn't have like a story to hang it on. I don't know. The problem's probably with me, not with that, because everyone loves it. So, but yeah, that's one thing I liked about George Saunders' Victory Lap was it used those techniques of stream of consciousness and stuff, but I thought in a way that didn't feel off-putting to me as a reader, but deepened my understanding of the characters and my love for the characters. Like I knew them in a really intimate way. I felt like at the end of the short story, it was a very short story, but I just knew them so intimately. And in fact, one I didn't want to because he's a horrible character and gets his comeuppance. But yeah, I wanted to get that same thing where like you knew them intimately, that same technique, but didn't put me off like those other bigger books put me off.
Well, I'll tell you this, Paul. Whenever I start thinking to myself that it's a me problem when I don't love a book that everybody else loves, I also remind myself that 50 Shades of Grey was a bestseller. So
yeah.
Sometimes I don't think it's a me problem.
Well, well, it's interesting for me because like there's a lot of books you'd think I'd love that I like just bounce on. Um, but there's also stuff on the other end of the spectrum. Like I can't get into Brandon Sanderson. I try. And there's just something about his writing that just doesn't pull me in.
Yeah.
And um and I don't know what it is. It just there's just something about it that just I can't picture it. I need to picture it. And but that's one of the things I really like about Name of the Wind, Rothfuss's stuff is I can picture it. I can get sucked into it. I find myself just completely engrossed in like his language and his world and stuff like that. And you know, I feel that way about when I read that. But I can do that with Sanderson. I just can. There's like this, but he's such a huge seller. Everyone loves him to pieces. I wish I
Yeah.
could.
I do like Sanderson, at least the stuff I've read so far. Patrick Rothfuss, I love, and it's really good when you need to pick up a book every 10 to 15 years. He's got one. So,
Yeah, every 10 to 15 years. I think him and George R. R. Martin are having like a waiting game to see who won't finish their book first.
although the number of books he wrote, at least for the first,
True.
six, he got through those.
Yeah.
Seven, to be honest, I still think he's mad about how they finished off the show. So he's just like, no, I'm not
Oh,
going
yeah.
to write it.
Yeah.
Screw y'all.
Yeah. And it pisses me off too because like you could like they even came out and said they were just eager to do other projects. They just wanted
Yeah.
to end it so they could do other stuff. I'm like, you know what? I know the feeling because like at the end of every novel, there's like a point like where you're like 20,000 words to the end, there you're almost
Mhm.
there. And you just want it to be done already. You want to do other stuff. You want it to be over. But you can't just phone it in because that's
I
when you
mean,
get endings that suck.
yeah, I mean, if you're going to do that, you might as well have just stopped where he stopped and, not done that last season.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So, getting on to the fact that you're talking about, you at least briefly mentioned about, what you want to write next. Do
Mhm.
you have any projects going on right now, or do you have a thought for what your next project's going to be?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, actually I do. Well, I mean, first I've got Cancer Eats the Heart is my next book. It's coming out October from Underland.
Okay.
That I actually wrote um, last year, early this year. That's a that was a lot of fun for me to write, sort of. If yeah, some scenes were not fun to write because it's some of that horror where I was trying to go to places where I didn't want to go. Some of it was a lot of fun, some of it's hilarious, but I was trying to get extreme horror out of my system. I want people to read and go, okay, like Paul Jessup doesn't write horror. They're gonna read that and go, okay, all right, okay, fine. I had a feeling Jordan Peele did that with Us and Nope. Like after some people were like, well, Get Out isn't really horror, and he's just like, okay, fine, screw you. Tell me this isn't horror then. Um, but some of it's a lot of fun too. Like it's basically an antichrist Bildungsroman.
Mhm.
The antichrist is a 20-year-old college girl, and she's gathering a following around her like a cult, and she's being hunted by a group of serial killers who think that killing her will end the world. So
And I've seen TikTok, so I can totally believe that the Antichrist is a 20-year-old girl. So,
yeah, it's written in such a fun way too. Well, not fun, structurally interesting, I guess is the way to put it. But not weird. I mean, it's slightly weird. It's done in first person plural for the most part, but it's
okay.
done in a way where that makes sense within the narrative framework of the story. So similar to the Virgin Suicides, um, but with her struggling with being part of a cult and trying to like keep her identity, but
Hmm.
also being sad when she loses that connection to the cult. And there's like that give and take between the two because I think that's how we really feel, like we want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, but we also want to be ourselves, and so there's this pull and give and take, and so I really wanted to get that come across in the narrative itself. But also I wanted a lot of ambiguity, so that's part of the first person plural, and when it switches back and forth between plural and first person singular, is do you is this all really happening? Is this ambiguous? What's going on for real and stuff? So that is a book where I kind of just went all out on it. Yeah. But then stuff that I'm working on now, because I am working on some stuff now too. Not quite as heady. um, there's finishing a vampire novel. It's very much in the Stephen King, Joe Hill frame of mind. When Joe Hill wrote Nosferatu, that kind of where he did a tribute to his dad. It's very much in that kind of horror kind of thing. It's small town Midwest because I grew up in Ohio, so I kind of wanted it to be there. But this is a far north of Midwest, so it's like next to the Great Lakes, that sort of thing. They're very interesting. It's about basically there's people who are disabled and chronically ill turning to becoming a vampire in order to trying to cure themselves. But of course, there's horror in that because they have to feed every 24 hours in order to not lose the benefits it gives them. But I also didn't want to wimp out with that and have it be so that, they could just feed on people that want to be fed on. Like that happens a lot in horror these days with the vampires. Like, oh, we'll just feed on this or we'll just feed on animals. I wanted the death to be a part of it. Feeding it to I wanted to be the moral the moral question, them kind of fighting with these urges, and what they're doing is right. And it also kind of talks about the U.S. health system, and like these things that were given that are supposed to cure us, but they also might hurt us just as much as they cure us, and how expensive they are. What is the cost that we're willing to do? Because I myself, I've got multiple sclerosis and I've got disabilities, and like my medication, if I didn't have health insurance, is $150,000 twice a year.
Wow.
It's ridiculous. So like I love my job right now, but what if I was working a job I hated? I would feel like I had to keep working there so I could afford my health insurance and stuff. So it wrestles with this idea of what cost is our health, especially with the system and things like that. And I just said earlier that it was a fun story in the style of Stephen King and Joe Hill. And it really is, overall it is. Even though it wrestles with these bigger themes, it's much lighter. It's very character heavy story, that sort of thing. So even though there's that stuff in the background, it's not beating you on the head with it. It's not like, look at what I'm talking about here. You have to have this conversation. It's, if you look for it, it's there. But if you don't look for it, it's very enjoyable, I think.
And I think those are the best ones. I love a book that has something important to say, but you learn it accidentally.
Yeah. Or like you read it a second time and you go, oh,
Right.
this is, there. Or like you're reading and you think about it and you think, oh, they might be talking about this. They might not. Or you just enjoy it. Like you can read it so many different ways, the book It, by Stephen King. I think that's one of the benefits, or The Shining even, like, or Misery, like, like later on as an adult, I know it's about his addictions and alcoholism. But as a kid, I didn't know that. And I ate up Misery like it was candy. I just read that cover to cover, skipping the weird scenes about where he's hallucinating his theme park. And not knowing what it's about. But as an adult, I can read it now and see the things that he talked about. I'm like, oh, wow, it adds an extra layer of enjoyment, I think. But you can enjoy without it. And I'm trying to go for that same thing with this one. So far, it's untitled. Because I either get really cool titles off the bat and I write a story about them, or I have no idea what I'm going to call it. Yeah.
Nosferatu. You could just not use that one right off the top.
Yeah, no, I can't. That's taken.
That was horrible. All right. So we've kind of talked about what you've written. We talked about what you're writing.
I get it. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, it was horrible.
The
it was
chronic illness.
Really bad.
I thought you were just mispronouncing Nosferatu. Like, oh, you're trying to pronounce it like Joe Hill's like.
No, it's not for you. All right.
Oh, okay.
It was horrible.
I'm quick to this.
Well, my pun is an acquired taste that most people don't want to acquire. So it's all good.
Okay. I got it. Just you think I'd get the dad joke quicker because I'm a dad.
Yeah. I have. Look at the gray. I've got practice.
Yeah.
So we kind of covered most of the stuff that you've got going on right now. Now I know you've been trying to do it this entire conversation, but now let's talk about other authors. What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Okay, so I mentioned before House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. I'm a huge fan of her stuff. Her writing just goes down so easy. It's great stuff. I'm finishing Kelly Link's latest collection, White Cat, Black Dog. What else am I reading? Eric LaRocca, The Tree Grew Because I Bled There. Uh, it's extreme horror, but for some reason it doesn't bother me as much as a lot of extreme horror does. So I'm actually enjoying that one. I just finished reading, speaking of extreme horror, my book club, we just read Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin.
Okay.
And that one, yeah, that turned my stomach a lot. There's like some scenes in there where just like, wow, she went there. Oh, I had to put the book down. So it wasn't scary. It was very stomach churning. There were some scary scenes. Don't get me wrong. There's some really terrifying scenes in there. But yeah, but I would highly suggest that because I really like. That's probably the best post-apocalyptic zombie story that I've read in a long time. So, also one with themes. Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's some other ones. I'm reading a lot. I'm constantly reading. What was the other one I'm reading? Right. Murakami's latest.
Okay.
Novelist as an occupation. Wonderful.
Gotta read Murakami sometime. I have not gotten to them yet.
This one is his book of essays, and it's so good. Just love his stuff. There's a problem with me and Murakami though, because when I was reading Kafka on the Shore and some of his other books, After Dark, yeah, I think that was called. I was reading them, and I was writing at the time. This one novel, urban fantasy, was huge. I had an agent. She was like, "You have to write an urban fantasy because I can actually sell it." Because when she took me on, it was right before the 2008 housing market collapse and borders collapse and all that. And so weird fiction was on an upswing. It wasn't called weird at the time, but like, all that stuff like new weird and things like that was on an upswing. So she took me on. I'm like, yay! And then it went, and nobody wanted it anymore. And so I'm like, oh no! And so I was writing urban fantasy to do that, but I was being influenced by Murakami's voice, and I didn't know at the time, but Murakami, his voice literally is him writing in English and then translating back into Japanese. And so then when it gets translated into English, it's being translated back into English. And so it's interesting. So I was writing this urban fantasy and I picked up his style without thinking. And my agent's like, what are you doing? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, well, this reads like somebody's translating it from Japanese to English. And I'm like, huh. And then later on, I found out that's what Murakami did. I'm like, oh, I guess his voice rubbed off on me without meaning, So I just thought that was kind of funny. But his novelist as a vocation is really good. His essays are fantastic in that. It makes me feel much better about my own writing, and it's in place in the whole pan. Because sometimes I just think I write too weird. No one's going to like me. But then I found out recently that horror fans don't give a shit if you're weird.
I think it's a plus.
It's a plus. They love it. They eat this stuff up. I mean, people that I wouldn't think would like my weird stuff when I was writing fantasy and science fiction are like just loving it. Like Glass House, they're like, this is wonderful. More of this, please. I'm like, all right, cool. I'm all for that.
Yeah, I think horror and sci-fi can both get a little weird and people aren't put off. I think once you start bleeding off into fantasy, people are like, wait, what?
Which is funny because like you'd think fantasy writers would be more, or readers would be more into it getting way out there. Like it used to be the case. I mean, like Last Unicorn, if you've read the book,
I haven't read the book, but I saw the movie and it feels like a 70s acid trip.
The book is even crazier. It's wonderful. It's a joke. I mean, there's so much comedy in the book that's lost in the movie. So if you like Princess Bride,
love Princess Bride.
Book is you'll love the book. It's very similar to because it came out around the same time the book The Princess Bride came out. And I think there was another book that also came out around that time too. I can't remember who wrote it, that influenced both of those. And it's done the same way where it's just mocking fairy tales. And The Last Unicorn is so funny in the book. And some of the jokes do make it in the movie, like the butterfly speech. But they don't, in the book, it's really, like Prince Lear in the book was raised by cats, like feral cats. He was a feral child raised by cats. So it's really funny.
Yeah, I might have to check that out. I know Beagle's got another book coming out at the end of the year, too. I'm Afraid You've Got Dragons, I think is the name of the book.
Oh, yeah, that sounds like fun. It sounds like he's returning to his like more whimsical comedy kind of stuff, too. So
okay. Definitely gonna be checking that one out. But I was gonna say, I see you're as bad as me. As like I've always got a print book, an ebook, and an audio book going at the same time. Obviously, ebook right now I'm reading Glass House. Audio, I told you I was listening to Kelly Link's Book of Love.
Yeah.
And if it tells you how far behind I get sometimes, print book, I'm currently reading an arc of Holly Black's Book of Night, which actually came out like 2 years ago. So
Good
that's
one.
how long I've had the arc.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Found it at the bottom of the TBR pile. I'm like, I should probably read this at some point.
Yeah, I've actually got like I got so many arcs in this library here, but I love it because then like later on, or like I buy books that I just know I'll read at some point. Some I got to read right away, but some, I just leave it there because I know I'll be just like, I need something to read. Oh, okay, I actually haven't read this, and I bought this a long time ago. Let's see what this is like, and it's like a nice little gift from my past self. I did that with T. Kingfisher's Nettle and Bone. I can't wait to read that whenever I feel like getting into it. That's the kind of weird horror I love.
I've
Weird
read
fantasy.
a couple of her books. I haven't gotten to that one yet. I know I got to read it. It's like everybody's favorite.
It is so, I just can't, like the idea just catches me and I read the first paragraph. Like I want to read this, but I'm like, I want to save it too. If that makes sense. I want to save it for like a special moment.
You can never read a book the first time again.
That's very true. That's very true. I think, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to save that'll be my treat to myself when I finish the vampire novel, because I'm 10,000 words from the ending and I've been working on it since 2020. I keep starting it and then like something will come up like, oh, I'll sell Glass House and I have to edit that. So and then that gets put on the back now though. Right. And then like, oh, they come to us like, oh, we want to do another book with you in the short story collection. So I've got to edit that and I got to write the other one. So that gets put on the back burner. But I'm so close to ending it. So that'll be my gift to myself. I'll read Nettle and Bone after I finish the vampire novel. That'll be the thing.
Yeah. Maybe we could do a buddy read because I got to read that one too.
Yeah, I think that'll be great. We could actually that'd be cool to do like an episode of that where we just talk like a book club kind of thing. Talk about Nettle and Bone.
But I think I read Illuminaries by her, and I know I read something else, but it has jumped out of my head. I know it's not one of her newer ones; it was an older one.
Yeah,
it's gonna drive me crazy. I'll figure it out later.
Yeah, she's one of those authors that can write anything, and I'll read it. Like,
yeah, because Illuminaries was very YA, but it was great.
Yeah, she does. She runs the gamut. Like I said, her horror stuff. There's some horror fans who like don't like her and say, oh, she writes cozy horror. I'm like, I don't care. It's good. It's good. Or it didn't scare me. I'm like, it scared me. So go to hell. But also too, I think so many people are like, horror has to scare. And that just bothers me because so much good horror does more than scare. It can just be atmosphere. Like, I mean, yeah, I don't think the Vincent Price, his Corman films are that scary, like his Poe films, but the atmosphere is just so wonderful. Or the Hammer horror, like early Hammer horror with Christopher Lee and stuff. It's just so beautiful and just gothic, and it just makes me feel like this wonderful way. And there's some horror where, it doesn't scare me, but it makes me feel gross and icky. And some people like that. And they consider that scary. I don't understand why. I mean, like, I feel like I want to vomit. That's not scary to me, Yeah. But that's horror can do so many things. I think just regulating to like, this scared me or didn't scare me is so limiting. It's so boring.
Well, like I've told people before, I like horror. I don't like gorer. I want the atmosphere, the setting, the storyline. Even if it doesn't scare me, to have that tension. I don't need to just see somebody, puking or they're playing cats in the cradle with their intestines or something. It's like,
yeah, I can probably tell the other stories in this collection you probably didn't like. Well, like I said, teeth.
They're mixed, but like I said, there were some I definitely. I actually made marks, and like I said, at least half of your stories I've got a star by to them. It's like, I love this one. And some of them you may not even think I loved, like The Happiness of Pinned Wings.
Actually, I love that story. That's one of my underrated favorites of the collection, because it
Finger Bones Hung Like Marbles. Love that one too.
Which one?
Finger Bones Hung Like Marbles, I think it was called.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Sometimes I can't read my own writing.
Yeah, no, that's a good one too. No, the one I thought you might not like is Gift of Teeth. The ending of that one.
Was that early on?
No, it's like near the end.
Gift of Teeth.
That's the one where her husband turns into.
I didn't mark it, but it wasn't a gross out. It just wasn't, like I said, it wasn't to me the same level. Like, Ghost Technology from the Sun I loved. Skinless
Yeah.
Man Counts to 5 I loved. Fake Plastic Trees, that one I love. That's one of the first ones I thought to myself is like, I can totally see that being an Outer Limits
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah, that's one I love too. That's one of those ones where it never got published. I've had it forever. I love it. But for some reason, it just never connected with the right editor. But I know it was like one of those stories like, this is such a great story, though. It's got to
It
be.
was. I absolutely love that story.
Yeah, the whole and there's references. There's the Dr. Love, Dr. Death stuff. That's actually references to Gene Wolfe, like some of his short stories, like The Island of Dr. Death and other stories,
Mhm.
which I love because his collection is The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories and Other Stories. It's so funny.
Well, that's how it turned out.
Yeah, it just makes me laugh because the title of the short story is the Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories, and so the title of the collection is The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories and Other Stories. So it's just
every time
he's
she
so
collects it,
playful.
he just gets bigger.
Yes, it's just so playful. It's fun. But yeah, no, that's one of those stories I actually love too. Yeah, Gift of Teeth. It was one of those ones where I tried to push myself, to gore because I don't like it, but I was like, let's see if I can do it because I want to see what I can do with it, and I want to try and make it beautiful in a way. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. It's interesting because there are some people that say that Glass House is very gory, but the people I talk to about it that hate gore don't mind it, which I think is interesting. And I'm not sure why that's the case. I didn't think of it as gory until like people started pointing out scenes to me, and I'm like, oh yeah, I guess that is pretty gory. Yeah. More in I don't know, how far are you into it?
Early on.
Have the Mothers of Sorrow showed up yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. Because I know that happens early, but not too early. So it's like one of those things. But I think that's the scenes that people say were gory for that, and like something that happens later that's a reference to Suspiria. But I don't know. I was hoping those ones didn't feel gory to me. Like that bothers me, because
Right.
some of the stories that in this one, the gore did bother me, even though I wrote them. But
well, I think sometimes it's a level too. For instance, I really liked Nat Cassidy's Nestlings. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
Yes.
But the scene where they feed him,
yeah,
and they kind of liquefy it, and it comes out, and then she gets down and licks it all up. I'm like, okay, I didn't need that scene.
Yeah, that's
really the only gory scene in that whole book, but it was like,
Yeah, I skimmed that part to see when it was done. I would have done. Yeah, there's some stuff in Gretchen Felker Martin's that were like that, where it's just like it was just wow. But it was, even though they were like that, the story itself was so good overall that I could just push through it.
Yeah. And like I said, it was only one scene, so I just kind of swept that one under the rug and still gave it like a 4 or 5 star.
Maybe that's it. Maybe it's because when it's the scenes in Glass House, I don't describe it in a way that's disgusting.
Which helps.
Yeah. Because like in Gifted Teeth, it is described in a way that's kind of disgusting at the end.
A little bit, but I didn't think it was as bad. Because I didn't think it was as bad. Like for instance, is that Nat Cassidy scene? That one was really good.
Maybe it's all in my head with that one. Like I pictured it in my head and I didn't describe it. Yeah. So like, yeah.
But like, that's probably the hardest thing to do as a writer, I'm assuming, is like you've got this picture in your head. Is like, how do I convey it to the reader without over explaining everything?
Yeah, that's always like super tricky, and like you don't want to do too much, too little, like Hemingway style, because like that works when you write realism, but when you're writing in the genre of the imagination, you can't rely on realism all the time. You have to actually go through and explain enough that they can picture it, but not leave out too much so that they're just like, huh? It's a balancing act, I think. And it would be something like it'd be easy to get stuck on, and you just kind of like keep going back and forth and back and forth. I mean, like early in my career, there'd be points where I just like rewrite a scene like a billion times because I couldn't figure out how to make it right. I don't do that anymore. I just kind of go, nope, and then like if it doesn't work, an editor will come in and be like, nope, fix this, do this. Explain more. What the hell did you mean here? There was several times in Glass House where like Darren's like, what the hell did you mean here? I'm like, I look at him like, actually, I don't know. I'm reading this down. I'm like, this makes, yeah, we can just actually cut this. This makes no sense.
It made sense when I wrote it at 2 a.m. that one morning, but
Yeah, yeah. Or you're on a roll and you're thinking like, especially with my stuff, I like tend to get a little poetic, and sometimes the poetry can get so abstract where it just you gotta you went too far. You just kind of pull it back or remove it, like without losing the writer or the reader at all.
well, I
It's
look
like,
at it like this way too, and I know we all seem to hold authors to a higher level,
mhm.
but there's not a person on the world who hasn't written themselves a note about something and looked at it 2 days later and go, "What the heck did that mean?"
Mhm.
I know that was supposed to remind me something.
Yeah, but that Seinfeld episode where he wakes up in the middle of the night and writes down the joke and he's laughing and then he can't figure it
Oh,
out the next day.
I know I must have watched it because I think I've
Oh,
watched all of Seinfeld, but yeah, I get the gist though. Yeah,
yeah, and he's like, why was this? He's like waking up, ha ha ha, ha, and the next day he's like, huh? I don't understand. Yeah.
that's like I know for a fact when I was younger, I don't publish, I don't write novels or anything like that, but I used to write poems a lot. And I remember one night I thought one was like, "Oh, that is so good. I'll remember that in the morning." That's all I remember about it. I'll remember that in the morning.
I've done that so much, especially with poems. Yeah, yeah. It's funny now, like when I write poems, they're just small, like short rhyming things that are just kind of like cute little things that maybe are 4 lines long. Like I don't write long poems anymore like I used to, and I like them. I don't think anyone will ever publish them, but I like them. They're kind of cute. I post them on the Blue Sky sometimes and on Twitter some other times.
I've
And
only ever had one that I thought was really good, and like my daughter loved it. And she's like, "You should get this published." And I sent it to a few magazines, and I haven't heard back from them in the last 5 years, so I don't think they're getting it.
um, poetry magazines go out of business so quick though too. Like the 2 places I had poems published in ages ago are out of business now. So it's really funny. Yeah, that's good. I'm like, yeah, that's actually, yeah. I feel that as a programmer. Yeah.
If I remember correctly, that's Brad. I think he also programs, or at least does something in IT. I know that for a fact.
Mm, yeah.
All right, so I've tied you up for about 90 minutes now. Let's see if we can pull it in the drive for people start falling asleep here.
Yeah.
And
All right.
I know it's later for you.
No, yeah, 9:30 is not too bad.
Couple of the fun questions. What secret skill, talent, or hobby might your fans not know about you that you would like them to know about you?
Well, some might know this, some might not. I make video games. One of them became a bestseller randomly out of nowhere. I originally wasn't even going to put it up for sale. I was just doing it for fun, and then everyone seemed to be into it. So I'm like, I'll put it up for like $2, and it became a bestseller. That was Bad Writer. It's basically a video game where you write short stories, which I think is hilarious. But yeah, I just do that for fun every once in a while. I tried making a go at it as a career, and then the video game recession happened like October. And so I was like, I'll just go back to doing it for fun again. But yeah, that's just one. Like I do pixel art and just video games, and I code them from scratch. I don't use an engine. I just, So that's one of those things that I consider a talent. It's more of a hobby. I don't consider it a career choice or anything like that. It's like just something 9-year-old me playing a Nintendo wanted to do someday. But it's not like a calling like writing or anything like that,
Well, I see you did take the difficult way, if you're going to code it from scratch and not use any engines. But the game definitely sounds like it was very on brand for you.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because like I made other video games before that weren't on brand. But with that one, I was talking with Lavi Tidar, and we were going like, we're just complaining about the short story market being such a pain in the ass. And we're like, this is like playing a video game, except you don't know if you're getting any further or not, and you can't level up. And so we're like, actually, this would make a really fun video game. So we just started brainstorming ideas like, how would this actually work as a video game? And I was like, the only way this could work is if you had a happiness meter. And the whole point of the game was to try to keep the writer from getting too depressed that they give up. And that was it. And so every time you write a short story, you get a little happier. If you send it to market, you get a little happier. If it gets rejected, you get sad. If it gets accepted, you get happy. And if you're not writing, you get sad, but then you get ideas. It's so like, it's like this balancing act. And it was like a lot of fun. And for some reason, writers are just like, oh my God, this is me. Somebody sees me for once.
Mm-hmm.
And it became this huge thing. It was like took off on Twitter. It was so weird. I have no idea why it became a thing, but I took a screenshot on itch.io, became a bestseller. I got ported to the Nintendo Switch. I'm like, what is even going on here? Which led me to the false belief that I could do it for a living, which, whatever. Who cares? It's fine. It actually has all these imitators now by people who don't understand it. They're like, well, this is boring. We're going to make it a fun game about being a writer, but then they don't get it. And then writers are like, this is stupid,
Right.
And they go back to my game. So
it had a specific market. And if you don't understand the market, you're not doing yourself any good.
Yeah.
Although you kind of joked about you don't understand why it became so big. The one that kind of threw me, not a game, but I've worked at a bookstore before, and one of the bookstores I worked at, for some reason, one of our best-selling items, we could not keep it in stock, was hander pants. Fingerless gloves designed to look like tidy whities.
What?
They had a little crotch and everything. I'm like, you can't get these dirty. It's going to start too many jokes.
People are so weird.
They sold out as soon as we get them in.
That's hilarious. It just makes me think of something like when the Time War book that went really big because somebody named Biggest Dickus on Twitter suggested it. And it went viral just because the name of the person suggested this is how you lose the Time War, and it made it go viral. I just like stuff gets popular for the dumbest reasons.
Hey, you're probably the same age or close to the same age as me, so I'm sure you remember the whole crisscross wearing the pants backwards.
Oh yeah. I remember that.
Or LL Cool J with one leg up.
Yeah, or the sneakers with the shoes untied. Like who did that? It was an 80s rap band. I can't remember off the top of my head. They did this one with Aerosmith, the song with Aerosmith.
Run DMC?
Yeah, Run DMC. They used to wear their sneakers without the shoelaces tied and like the tongue over the top of it. That was their thing.
Sometimes it's all about starting a trend.
Everyone did it.
I don't know. I don't know if you know this or not as a TV fan, but I remember like Happy Days.
Yeah.
One of their biggest things was trying to create a catchphrase so everybody would be talking about it on, Monday morning or whatever.
Yeah.
All the wah, wah, wahs and stuff, they were just trying stuff out to see what would pick up.
Yep. And we all know, hey.
Yeah, that one probably did the best, or sit on it, Potsy.
Oh, sit on a Potsy? Yep. Ponzi scheme went into the lexicon. I mean, that's kind of nuts.
Yep.
The fact that people call a Ponzi, I think most people don't know what a Ponzi, they know what a Ponzi scheme is, but they don't know where it came from.
Like, he wasn't the most popular person on that show, but
no. Yeah.
Everybody liked to make fun of Ralph.
I think a lot of kids have never seen Happy Days. I know my kids have, but most kids haven't these days. Gen Z.
I love Henry Winkler.
No Nick at Night.
We're getting off topic again.
Yeah.
So above and beyond that, was there any question that you were expecting that you didn't get, or just something that you wanted to add?
No, not really. Nah. I'm trying to think of anything. No, we covered a lot of the bases.
I just always want to make sure that there's an opportunity to like, hey, you didn't bring this up, and I was hoping to talk about it.
Yeah. No, I'll just bring it up again. Oh, there's the book that's coming out next week. Oh, look at that.
Okay.
Look at that cover though. And that's
well, this is where it would be if it was out already, but I didn't have a physical copy, so I couldn't put it in the background behind me.
Yeah, I got mine yesterday.
Nice.
Yeah, so I was just like, that's cutting it close. I'm like,
perfect timing though.
But that's fine.
I knew he was coming out soon. I just couldn't remember when, or I don't think you actually had a date the last time we talked.
Yeah, no, we didn't yet. We didn't. We were like, I was still talking over with my my publisher and stuff because we were still doing some edits. He was still working on the cover art, which that's great cover art though. And the title, I mean, that's just one of those ones. It's so funny because like when I came up with the title, I didn't think it was a big, like I was like, it stuck in my head, but I didn't think it was that big of a deal. But everyone I told the title to were like, that's an amazing title. I'm like, really? Okay, cool. And then when it got published,
imagination, yeah.
Yeah, when I got published and everyone's like, this is a great title. I'm like, okay, I know what the title of the book is then, you know? But some of the other titles in there are like that, where I was just like, oh, that's kind of a good title. I like it. And then people are just like, no, this is a great title. Like Secret in the House of Smiles is another one where I was like, oh, that's a pretty okay title. And then people just love it. And I'm like, all right. I found out through the years, I'm not the best judge of my own writing. The stuff I think,
Are any of us though?
yeah,
Really?
that's so true. Like the stuff I love, people are like, oh, that's okay. It never seems to take off. But the stuff I think, oh, this is pretty good. Everyone just absolutely loves. So
I
yeah.
think too, it doesn't help that as a writer, you always know exactly what was in your head.
Mm,
And so therefore sometimes you don't get what somebody else doesn't get.
that's true.
But if you explain it to them, it's kind of like explaining a joke. Now it's lost. You
Yeah,
feel the
that's very
entire
true.
point.
That is so true. It's 100% true. Yeah,
All right.
but it makes me happy that a lot of people seem to be connecting with Happiness of Pinned Wings, though, because that's my favorite of this collection.
Which one did you say?
Yeah, it's even though like I like all the stories, just Happiness of Pinned Wings is just the one that
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
I,
and it's
I really like that one.
yeah, it's such a low key story, but it's like you just get into the you want to I don't know I want to follow the characters more after the story's over and stuff. It's
Which is probably a good thing.
mhm,
I feel like sometimes if it's too complete, it kind
mhm,
of ruins it.
yeah,
I'm sure you've seen Rain Man.
yeah,
End of Rain Man. The first time I saw that, I'm like, no, he's supposed to say "I love you too."
mhm,
Dustin Hoffman's character.
yeah,
And then as I stepped away from it, I'm like, no, that was a perfect ending. He wouldn't
yeah,
have. That's not the character.
yeah. That makes
So
sense.
you kind of want to see is like, where did this go? But it's better off not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like the ending of Casablanca, even
Yep.
where you want them to get back to it, but it leaves it open still, even though they don't. It's very interesting. Like I like stories that leave things open. Although that one, even though it does leave things open, it does have a very like ending. It comes to a close. It doesn't. It's not like the ending of Winterlight where it just like you know
Hmm.
there's more out there. But speaking of Twilight Zone, I think that one has a very Twilight Zone-ish kind of ending, I thought, with Happiness of Pinned Wings, but in a good way. I liked it.
Well, plus, if you ever want to revisit it, you got to leave it a little open.
Yeah, that's true. You always want to leave, especially with a short story. They have to feel bigger on the inside, like a TARDIS.
Yeah, oh, now I'm brain dumping. You had which? I'm sorry, you got 24 stories in there.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
trying to remember if I can remember which one it was now. There was, I think it was actually Ghost Technology from the Sun.
Mm,
As a short story, I liked it. I really felt though I could totally see you taking that almost to a novella stage
mm.
if you like built up the beginning a little bit more and see where it went from there, where her path takes her.
Yeah.
Uh, you
One of these
definitely,
days.
like I said, if you wanted to revisit that one, I think you've left yourself open for it.
Mhm. Yeah, that one I've actually thought about revisiting all through the years. It's one of the first stories I had published. It was the first one I ever sold professionally to Postscripts magazine, and they were paying like pro rates. I think it was like 8 cents. No, it was 5 cents a word at that point. It was like 2007, 2006, 2007. So it was my first big sale, and it was interesting because when I first sent it to them, it was a different story. It was actually had a frame narrative, um, and it was I think I actually mentioned this in the introduction that it was originally a frame narrative, and I got rid of the frame narrative and just focused on those characters, and it just was so much better. And like, so I sent my edits back to Pete Crowther, and he was like, "Oh no, this is even better. We're definitely publishing this story in the next issue." And I was on the cover. I was like, "That's awesome! My name's on the cover. Look at that. That's never happened to me before." It was so amazing. But yeah, that's one I always want to return to. It was actually listed. That was the first one I ever got in the back of a year's best fantasy and horror, and it was a recommended reading.
Nice.
It wasn't in the or an honorary mention. That's what it was, an honorary mention in year's best fantasy and horror. So it wasn't actually in it, but it was an honorary mention, which was huge. And I was just like, I got to return to that someday because the voice of the character too. I love the voice of that one. It makes me like that. The voice of her and the voice of Stone Dogs. I really liked writing their
Okay.
their voices. That was another one that actually got in. I think it was a year's best. Oh no, best horror of the year. That was an honorary mention in that one for Stone Dogs. That was a interesting ending to that one. That one definitely just kind of goes zip, you know. But I think I got better with endings too over the years, being able to write endings better.
Well, I mean, we'll hopefully everybody improves a lot.
Yeah.
That didn't sound right. You know what I meant. Approves as they go.
That's the thing.
Improved a lot from that.
I know I'm not supposed to say this. I'm supposed to like all my writing is awesome and amazing, and I've always been the great writer I've always been. But no, I've grown so much through the years. And really I can see where like looking back, like I'm like, oh, this is where I was in this stage when I was doing this and this sort of thing. And like, but I'm not supposed to tell the readers this. I'm supposed to be like, they're all my precious babies. They're all great.
Well, I mean, you got to remember too, though, if it wasn't for those earlier works, we wouldn't be getting something like Glass House. I mean,
yeah, no.
Writing is the ability to get the story in your head, I think, is a talent in that, not everybody can do it. The ability to actually convey that story to something people like, that is a skill. That is something you've got to build up.
Yeah.
It's, nobody makes their first free throw.
No, it's very true. It's very true. And it's weird too, because like it spirals too, because there are stories where like later on in my career, I write these short stories and I'm like just hitting stinkers, they don't seem to work. They don't seem to work. And then I'll write, like I'll get in a run where I'm just writing like boom, 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 really great stories, one right after another. And I'm not even sure how that works or why it works, but it does. Like things work that way. Novels are different. It took me a long time to learn how to write novels because I'm a short story writer by nature. But those, since you're in them and delving in them for so long and they're so like all over the place and stuff, I think those even out towards like we're like, and you can edit them into shape and stuff like that, where as long as the bones are good, it's good. With a short story, it's more, it's harder. It's just harder to beat into shape if it doesn't work,
Right.
Because there's like so little there or too much there, or you know what I mean? And it's just, but it's interesting because like what works for me and doesn't work for other people. I found that like stories that I struggled on that took me forever to write and I thought were just like, become favorites of people. And so like, Neil Gaiman said at some point, like you can work forever on a short story or it can be a breeze and it's a piece of cake and the writer or the reader will never notice the difference. They won't tell which one took forever and which one was just like no problem at all.
They don't see the effort that went into it. So
no, they can't. And they don't know why, and I don't know why I wish I knew why some stories are harder to write than others, but it's just how it is. It's so interesting. And it's also, that's one of the days when it feels like a job and it sucks. But I still love it, even though it feels like a job. And some days it's so easy. Like there's one I'm working on right now writing, and it's basically about like a dream serial killer slasher. And it's very Philip K. Dick, the dream machines and stuff that are in it and like playing with reality. So it's like if Nightmare on Elm Street was mixed with Cronenberg, but without the body horror, really. There's not as much body horror in this, but like this weird science fiction, kind of a thing. But it took me a few tries to get the first paragraph, but after that was done, writing it has been so easy. It's ridiculous. It's almost too easy. Like after a week, it's already like almost 10,000 words. I'm like, this can't be this easy. Why is it this easy? But it is. So I don't know why it is. I wish I knew.
Well, hopefully it stays that way because now you said it and jinxed it. So.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. So we'll see where it goes. It's so funny because it's not the story I had in my head. Maybe that's it. Maybe my original idea, if I would have tried to force it to be that way, it wouldn't be easy at all. It would be just horrible and painful. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's the ones where I try to force to match my original idea in my head that become hard to write because I can't let go of it. And I keep forcing it to go into that shape. Skinless Man Counts to 5 was like that. And it was like difficult to write for that reason, but I think the end results are really good. And it matches the story I had in my head when I first had that phrase just pop into my head. Because I knew what it was going to be right away when I thought of that. And the interesting thing with that was like when I came up with the title, which is the title first, it was actually, I was working at I was doing technology for a doctor school, where people learn to become doctors, and they had a dummy to practice on, and it talked. And so you could program it to say things. And somebody programmed to say, help, help, help. And it freaked out the nurse and almost gave her a heart attack.
Jeez.
And so like that just stuck in my head that it was so scary. And I'm like, and I was thinking like, well, I can't just say the mannequin like says help, because that's a dumb title. And I started playing with it because that's what I do. And I was like, well, those dolls, the Skinless Men, like where you learn anatomy and stuff, right? I was like, well, that'd be interesting. What if you could program something like that to say something? I mean, that'd be creepy. What would it say? And then it just popped in my head, the Skinless Man Counts to 5. I'm like, all right, I'm rolling with that. That's got to be something. What? Who knows?
Yeah. I think it was the best part of the story too, though, is the fact that why is he counting? What do the numbers mean? And then they start to pick up on it. They're like, oh crap.
Yeah. And the original version of that, it kept moving towards a solution, like a reason, a why, and it just wasn't working. But when I went back to the original idea and have it be no answer, a very waiting for Godot kind of thing, and that's not a spoiler, I don't think. No, it works better because it's a horror story. So like the fact that you don't get, that's the horror of it, is that there is no answer. Some people said it was depressing, which I found kind of strange because it's so futile. But I'm like, well,
I can see that, but
it didn't depress me. It just kind of scared the crap out of me while writing it. But I mean, it's different for everybody, like people like, and that's the wonder of writing and reading, that we all pick different things out while we read, it's what makes it so just fantastic.
Exactly. That's like my two favorite books are Count of Monte Cristo and Swan Song. Oh, I mean, those are not exactly the same genre.
No.
We'd like, it's good to have different wants and needs, and what makes. I feel it would be very boring if, like, I know some people, they read nothing but fantasy, and I love fantasy. That's probably my top genre.
Yeah.
But I went through, like I said, 80s and 90s. I totally went through a horror phase, and I'm coming back to it now a little bit. Yeah. Now my TBR list would probably be smaller if I stuck to one genre, but yeah, there's a good book is a good book.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, like, I seem to primarily gravitate towards horror, but I love science fiction so much. I love fantasy so much. And then I had that period, like in my teens and 20s, where I was just all about the literary realism, especially experimental stuff, and I love that stuff. And I can still read it now, but I need more, I need more. But that's one thing I just love. I could just read that stuff all day, and I told somebody that one of my big influences is Hayao Miyazaki. And they're like, but you're a horror writer. How do you do that? I'm like, I was like, first of all, I don't just write horror, I don't. But I mean, how boring would I be? How terrible would my stories be if it was just horror? You need the cross-pollination of all these different influences to do something interesting, and Miyazaki's up there as well as Howl's Moving Castle, not just his movie but also the books like House of Many Ways and all the other ones like that, and just like all different kinds of fantasy and stuff. I absolutely love, and sci-fi too. Like, and I just pull from all of it, and the more whimsical and the more fun. And I think some people miss the funny stuff in my books, which I guess is fair because it's very like melancholic and morose. But I mean, there's humor in there too, and whimsy and stuff like that. I think actually the first story in Skinless Man Counts to 5, there is quite a bit of whimsy in there. Like the dead don't like pancakes is one of the sentences. It's just fun and funny. But I think that's actually her narrator too is very similar to the one of Ghost Technology from the Sun as well. I think, the voice. Yeah, I'm going to write that one of these days. That's such it needs to be a novella or a novel. It'll be part of my cult. I'd say trilogy, but it's starting to become like a quartet, maybe a tetology now, writing about cults.
I didn't mean for you to give yourself homework. Well, Why
Well, no,
would
no,
I
no.
do
It's
this?
it's it's just one of
Oh,
those
I need to do
stories.
this.
The stories I that's one of those stories where I enjoy it so much, and I love hearing other people enjoy it too. It's just it was such a story. It's one of those ones I'm so glad I rewrote it. And when I rewrote it, it actually came easier than the first time I wrote it because I just leaned into the girl's voice. Maybe I think that's it. I think that's the step that comes easy for me is when I have a good voice for the narrator, even if it's third person. It makes it easier to write. I think that's a big part of it too.
I think also too, sometimes, and again, I'm not talking as a writer, I'm talking to somebody who's talked to writers. Sometimes you've got to be in the right place personally to write that
Mhm.
story.
Yeah.
I know the last book that William Kent Kruger had written, he talked about the fact that he originally wrote that, I think, like 50 years ago, and he
Mhm.
kept trying to rewrite it like every 5 to 10 years, but he
Mhm.
had to get to where he was now to finally get the story right.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's not like he wasn't writing anything else during that time.
You know, you're that's absolutely correct because that's the way it was a Skinless Man Count to Five. I actually had the original idea, 2004. So close to 20 years because it's 2022 when I actually wrote it and got it published. And it just took me so long to get to the place where I was to write it. And it's funny because at that 2022 was February, me and Jonathan Wood were like, we're gonna challenge each ourselves to write a short story a week. And so we did it for like a month. And that was I was running out of ideas. And so like I'm gonna finally write this one. And that one actually took 2 weeks. But yeah, I think I needed to get to that point to write it. And that's why it turned out as well as it did. Because it took forever to get there. But once it got there, maybe that's the case with that as a novel or a novella for Ghost Technology from the Sun, which is another great title. That's just one of those ones where it's title first, story second. Um, I need more of those because it makes it
Just gotta
easier
let them
sometimes.
percolate for a while.
Yeah, but it just what if I don't have the title first? Then coming up with the title later sucks. It's so much
Fair.
harder. Yeah.
I found that not every case, but in a lot of cases, it seems like the title is somewhere in the book on most books. Like
Yes.
you'd be reading through a book and it's like, I got no, okay, there it is. That's why they named the book this.
That is a really good way of doing it. Because some of the stories, the short stories in there that have good titles, that didn't come up with the title first, were in the story. Like Happiness of Pinned Wings, that was actually in there because I couldn't come up with a title for it. And I was just reading through. I'm like, ooh, that's a really good line. I'm just gonna stick that, that's gonna be the title then. And that worked really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually written to like a friend of mine was coming out with a short story anthology called Graveyard's Yawn, and it didn't pay, but he was just a really good friend. I'm like, I'm just going to write something for you, and I think that's the best. What I do is when I like just don't have any like, I just run with it. Run with an idea. That's when I come up with some of my best stuff, and I just ran it like I just like, all right, it's about zombies. All right, I'm just going to go with it. What would I do for a zombie story? And I didn't want to do the traditional zombie story, because everyone's done that. And I was like, well, let me see what I can do with it. And then I came up with the first line about there being everyone carried a graveyard in their pocket. Everyone carried a graveyard with them. And then I just kind of went from there.
That I did like that whole thought. I don't want to say thought process, but that whole idea too of the graveyard in their pocket.
Yes, I did. Like when I wrote that, I had her character was just so real for me at that moment. And it was interesting because at that time I was, oh my God, that was so long ago when I wrote that. I was in my 20s still. And I was realizing that I'd known too many people that had died when I was in my 20s. And it was just kind of like like, I was like, I'm too young to have known like 8 people that have died already. And that was like weighing on my mind when I wrote that. And it was kind of like a key part to that. And I think it fits in with a zombie story very well because like that would happen in the zombie apocalypse. Like 20-year-olds would know too many people that have died.
Yeah.
Of course, my time was I was in a small town in Northeast Ohio, and there was nothing going on anywhere. And so like it was during that time period when heroin and opiates were going through small towns in the Midwest, and I knew too many people that died because of that. And that was like, I guess that's your zombie apocalypse right there, you know.
No, no, I get it. My wife's a nurse, and I always say every once in a while she'll come home and she's like, "Man, we operated on somebody younger than me today," and it just
Yeah.
kind of kicks you in the mortality there.
It does. It does. It's funny because now I'm at the age where the number hasn't grown,
Mhm.
and more people my age are like have people that they've known have died that same amount. So I'm like, okay, good. I've caught up with my peer group now. Now we'll just be at the same spot, I guess. It'll be really bad when I'm like, in my 60s and I'm like going through the obits. I'm like, oh, there's another one, like, yeah.
I feel like that's got to be something that affects you as a horror writer over the years too.
Mhm.
I know, like teens and 20s, you could be climbing up the side of a mountain or something like that and not think anything of it and not care in the world. You get to my age and you go outside and you look down the stairs and you're like, I hope I don't fall. I've cracked
Yep.
my neck.
Yeah, especially because I have multiple sclerosis. So literally falling downstairs it happens
Yeah.
like all the time. So it's like, it's terrifying. And it's like, I have to go very slowly with a lot of stuff. Like I walk with a cane now too, because of that sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, the terrors are so different from when I was 20.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's why the vampire novel is kind of important to me too, because I'm dealing with that. It's like I've got an older character for once, like someone in their late 30s in that one, um, dealing with all the stuff that people in their late 30s deal with. It's a different kind of scary
hmm We,
than in your
we, we
20s.
see our mortality a lot closer.
Yes. Yeah. You're more, it's like up close and personal. Like after I turned 40, I started thinking about my death in ways that I didn't even think was possible before. Like it's all of a sudden there staring at me like and
Mhm.
like I actually it's like not an abstraction, it's an actuality now, and it messes with your head.
What was the one I saw the other day? Just to come around to a lighter note, there was a comedian. I remember
Like,
he was like standing on like a chair or a desk or something like that. And he goes to step down. He goes, I can tell what age you are because everybody under 30, not thinking anything of me jumping down from this desk. Everybody over 30 is like, I hope he doesn't break his knee.
yeah, yeah, yep, we didn't like, yeah, fall, yeah, that's that's
We
that's
got to think about things.
way too accurate, but awesome though.
All right. So, final wrap it up. We're getting close to 10 o'clock your times.
Oh
And
crap, yeah.
I told you like half an hour ago I was going to wrap it up, but I
Yeah,
enjoy
it's fine.
talking to you. So,
Yeah, no, this is great. This is why I love doing
but
podcasts and stuff.
everything, I always finish with the same thing. Obviously, I stream this both on YouTube and Twitch. Twitch is on my Amazon. I'm not an Amazon hater, but I'm an absolute lover of brick and mortar stores, independent stores when possible. Shout out to your favorite brick and mortar bookstore,
No question in my mind, Werner Books.
Warner Books.
Werner Books. It's a small one in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's always been down the street from me for the last close to 15 years now. It opened up when my kids were little. It's been our neighborhood bookstore forever. It's just recently, as a few years ago, it's changed owners, and the new younger owners are actually great. They're wonderful people. I go in there all the time. They turn into a coffee house / bookstore. They're going after Barnes and Noble, basically, trying to
Nice.
steal their clientele. But it's always packed full of people. Love going there. Very supportive of my writing too. That's where I'm doing my book launch next Thursday
Cool.
for Skinless Man Counts to 5.
Pretty sure they probably got a website. So after this is over and I can
Mhm.
edit stuff again, I will get their link also added to the
Yeah,
description as well.
yeah, I'll add it to the chat here. Actually, hold on. Let me just make sure I'm writing it right.
Do half my work for me. I see how you are.
Hold on, I'm just making sure. Okay, it is WarnerBooks.com. So I might be helping them with their website soon. Where's the
Look at this. Look at the synergy going there.
Yeah, because that's what I do with my day job. And I actually said, you know what? Hey, if you guys need help, just give me a shout out. So we talked to them recently. I have been meaning to stop by there. I've been just so busy with the book stuff, upcoming book stuff. I got to stop by and see if they still need help with that, because I'd love to help, because they're a really great bookstore. And it's like one of those things where they've been promoting my books and stuff. They've been doing my book launch stuff. They've been practically hand selling it to people. It's great, So, and they have a horror book club. What's that?
I was just going to say, I think there's a big synergy too between authors and the independent bookstores.
Yeah.
I briefly worked for a big chain here in Omaha.
Mhm.
They've left now. It's called Books a Million.
Yeah.
But it drove me crazy because they're the second biggest bookstore after Borders closed down, second biggest bookstore in America. Every time an author came to town, they went to the Bookworm, little mom and pop independent store, which I love. I actually ended up working for them. I worked for them for a few years.
Mhm.
But it was like, how come every author, Ben Carson,
I have an answer for that, by the way.
Stephen King, all those guys. Well, I'm saying back when I wasn't working at the Indies, Stephen King went through them and like that. And the biggest author we got at Books a Million in like the 3 years I worked there was Dog the Bounty Hunter's daughter. Wasn't even Dog.
Wow.
And don't get me wrong, anybody thinks I'm picking on her. She was the nicest person I have ever met on the planet. Not
That's
to
really
mention, you see Dog the Bounty Hunter, his daughter is a little tiny petite thing. I mean, but
Which
yeah,
that's
she
such
came. It was a rainy night. She was a great person. So I'm not picking on her, but I'm like, all the authors, all the big authors, all went through the Bookworm.
Yeah. Well, just from my own experience, sometimes actually getting any bookstore, like big chain bookstore, to take you seriously and set up an event is a pain in the ass. Like, especially for like local authors, because they get very skeptical, especially these days, because a lot of people are self-publishing and stuff, and so a lot of the bigger publishing houses or bigger bookstores don't want to have to deal with like trying to like do selling and buying on consignment and stuff like that.
Yep, exactly.
So they just don't deal with local authors or anyone that's not published through the big five, and so it becomes like a royal, just a pain in the butt. Because I even found, like, even when I had like what is in some anthologies and I was in the big five, I said, "Hey, can I do like something here? Can I sign books or something? Because I'm in this anthology." Oh, no, that's okay. Well, can I sign a copy here so you can put? No, we don't do that. And this is Barnes and Noble. I was just like, what? And I went to like several other Barnes and Nobles like in the nearby areas, and it's just like they just don't want to do it. It's so weird. I'm not saying they're all like that because obviously like each place has different people running them. But like all the ones I've been to, it's very hard to actually get them to take you seriously,
Yep.
which kind of stinks, as an author.
And the independents, you're dealing with a person who makes the decisions too.
And they usually are very excited because they're like, "Hey, it's free publicity. Then we get to bring more people into the store. It's great." And the nice thing about Erie is there's like 3 indie bookstores here. There's Books Galore, which is actually only about a 5-minute walk the other way. And that's been around here even longer than Warner Books. But Warner Books is my neighborhood bookstore, and they love me, so I'm mentioning them first. But Warner Books is great. But Books Galore is great too. And Pressed, which is more downtown, is also one. So it's like this. Erie's not a super huge city. It's not as big as like Cleveland, Buffalo, New York. It's a metropolis. It's a very kind of medium-sized metropolis. But we've got three independent bookstores, all within each other's walking distance, and it makes me so happy that people around here read that much that they want to visit those many bookstores.
You're on a Macintosh, aren't you, Paul?
Yes, I am. It's my work computer, and it's got a good audio.
You did the little thumbs up when you went like this. The little thumbs up popped on the screen, which I know is a Mac thing.
I didn't know they did that. I don't like that. That's annoying.
Yeah, you did it once, and like a little bubble popped up in your corner with a thumbs up.
It didn't show for me on here. I didn't know that does that. That's kind of funny.
I've seen it a couple times, and finally somebody mentioned that it was like an Apple thing. I'm like, okay, because I'm like, mine doesn't do that.
That's my work computer. I have my home computer where I do my writing on because I don't like to mix work and private work stuff. But the video and audio on that one's garbage, and this one's got really nice video and audio. So when I do stuff like this, I do it on this because otherwise, what's that?
Which I appreciate.
Yes. Otherwise, they sell.
Yeah, I still don't know. I couldn't get my audio. My audio was like messed up for like weeks after I tried messing with some stuff, and I couldn't get it to work. It was just always doing this hiss.
Oh, right.
And just for giggles, I was like trying to do stuff with sound earlier, and I sprayed a can of air on it, and it fixed itself. I'm like, really? Yeah. Compressed air fixed my microphone?
I've actually had to do similar stuff to that. No, this one's just it's a cheap little HP all-in-one computer. It's good enough for writing. That's all I want it for. It's basically a step up from the netbook I used for writing for close to 15 years that finally just died. finally. It was such a good computer for writing. I mean, you couldn't do anything else on it. Like literally, you could barely even go on the websites, but that's fine. Yeah, this one, it's not much better though. And it's just for writing, and it's the audio and video. It's got a little camera that flips up and stuff, but it's not good. But this one, because I do a lot of working remotely and things like that for the university, so I need to have a good audio mic and things like that. So
Nice. Gotcha.
yeah.
All right. Well, didn't look like we had a couple of comments, but we didn't have any questions in chat. So probably going to go ahead and wrap it up here.
Okay.
Obviously, keep in touch. I'm going to let you know what I feel about Glass House as soon as I finish it. But like I said, the beginning is absolutely, like the writing is absolutely gorgeous. Loving that story so far. And then once again, you said you had one coming out late at the end of the year.
Yep. October. That's called Cancer Eats the Heart.
Okay.
And that's the Antichrist buildings Roman kind of thing.
Perfect.
Yep. Cool. Antichrist coming into her power.
No, I kind of like those religious ones, so I'll be looking for that one too.
Well, I mean, you might not like some of the gorier bits in that one because I did. I'm
still gonna check it out.
Yes, yeah, check it out. But and I'm very proud of a lot of stuff I did with it. But there's like a few scenes that might be too much for you. You might not be. You just be like, it's not that bad. What the hell is Paul thinking of? But when I wrote, I was like, oh. But I mean, I think that I'm saying I might be done with gore for a while, but I probably won't be. But I might be. Who knows? I kind of want to move away from it for just a tiny bit, at least. Best places to get the book. So the publisher's website is the best place. Here, I will put a link down here because you can get both the ebook and the print copy for the same. Like when you buy the print copy, you get the ebook for free in PDF, EPUB, MOBI formats. Yeah, if you go there, it's got both the books, Glass House and Skinless Man Counts to 5. You can also get it at Amazon. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. You can get it at like 8 Books. You can get it like a whole bunch of places. Kobo Bookstore, I think, has it. You can get it pretty much any place you want. And if you're in the Erie area in Pennsylvania, stop by Warner Books. You can get a signed copy. I live like right down the street, so you can just say, "Hey, can I get this signed?" They'll call me. I'll come down there. Literally, I've done it like several times. One time I did it and I surprised someone because I went there and I stopped by to pick something else up. I think a Stephen King book that they had back ordered for me that I needed a copy of because I didn't have that one. And I saw it on the shelf, like somebody reserved it. They're going to pick it up. I'm like, oh, can I see that for me? Like, and I said, it's coming for somebody named Paul. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to just sign it, personalize it for him. Mm-hmm. Turns out I'm Facebook friends with the guy. He freaked out when he got in the car and was like, oh my God, he signed it and personalized it. He'd driven up from Pittsburgh just to get a copy from that store. He was so excited. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Wow, that is cool. I would be so afraid though that, he was buying it as a gift for somebody else and now it's signed to Paul.
Oops, but it wasn't. It was
no, it wasn't. I'm just saying that's the first thing that came to my mind because we've had some times where people.
I wish I would have thought of that, but I didn't.
Ordered a book and wanted it personalized, and then never came and picked it up. So of course we can't sell it to somebody else unless somebody else just happens to be named Alice.
Oh, that's another good point. Well, anyway, I cleared it with the book.
Like no. It's a good story. I'm just saying that was my own personal
Yeah, I know. Well, now I'm gonna definitely ask twice before I do that. So. But I knew him I knew him from Facebook, so because we've talked a few times on there. So
in which case, he probably would have still kept it, but
yeah, but I knew him from Facebook, so I thought it'd be okay. So
I do have to say, I am a big sucker for finding out an author's personal bookstore, and then if I want something for a gift for somebody, I will call that bookstore to get it personalized.
Yeah, I tell them all the time, if anyone wants them personalized or something. Oh, another funny story like that. They have a horror book club there. So I go to the first horror book club, because I want to just read and just talk to people, stuff like that. I didn't even mention I was an author, but of course, since the owner knows me, the first time, oh, Paul, but they didn't mention my book or anything the first time of the horror book club. It didn't come up at all. I go, that's okay. That's fine. I can just enjoy this and not have to do the author song and dance. But I sit down and right there is my book, Glass House, next to somebody. And I'm like, I'm not going to say anything yet. And so like everyone's talking and stuff, and at the end of the horror book club, we're done talking about the first book. I think it was The Woman in Black, which was really good. I like The Woman in Black. It has a very Paul Tremblay ending, which is kind of a surprise because it's an older book. And she's like, "Oh, I'm reading this book. This is great. This is awesome." Like, and I look at her, I'm like, "Well, do you want it personalized?" She's like, "What?" "Well, that's my book." And I pulled out my ID. I'm like, "Oh, see, that's me." She's like, "Really?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can send and personalize that for you." So I thought that was really cool. Like, because I waited till like we're all done, you know.
So apparently she hadn't checked out the author's photo in the back yet.
There wasn't one. There's no author
Oh,
photo.
okay.
No, yeah, yeah.
Almost
So
everyone seems like the author has a photo in the back these days.
I know. I kind of wish mine did, but you know. Well, I think that's because these are trade paperback, and those usually don't. It's usually the hardcover and like the back flap, or sometimes if you're Stephen King, your face is the back.
So before I let you go, just because you brought this up, you might get a kick out of this. Brian Freeman, currently he's writing the Jason Bourne novels, but he's got his own books as well.
Oh yeah.
He told a story one time. He thought it was kind of funny. He's like, yeah, he went to get his book published, and he went to get his first like author, cover photo for the back, or not cover photo, but the author photo, headshot. And he's like in there, and he's like in there, and the guy's like, "Is this okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, you got the FS." He's like, "And don't worry, I can get rid of the double chin."
Oh.
It's like, ouch.
Oh.
He's told that story, so I don't feel like I'm throwing him under the bus by sharing that story. He was just like, he was not ready for that part of the business.
I kind of get that because I used to be a heavier person.
Until
a few years ago.
I work on mine a little bit too. So.
Yeah. So I used to be like a few years ago, I was much heavier than I was, and I got an author photo then at that time, and they did like a professional one. Because Silence That Binds was coming out. So that one was coming out. And so I got a professional one done, and it's just, they did the same. And I'm like, "Oh, thank you. I do look better without it." That was that was around when I had just shaved the beard because I had the giant beard for a short amount of time there.
Yeah. I think I saw a picture of it. When I was looking for a shot to put up on the thumbnail, I found a few photos of you.
Yeah. Why did I do that? I don't know. That was like 2 years. It was the pandemic. I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror.
You want to talk about not recognizing somebody.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen the author photos, but you've seen the author photos, the old author photos, and the current author photo of Jim Butcher.
Yes.
He cut his hair, and I was like, I almost didn't recognize him.
I didn't recognize him because I was actually looking at your past, and like Jim Butcher was there, and I'm like, wait a minute. That doesn't look like Jim Butcher.
Yeah, now don't get me wrong. I think it looks good. I actually think it looks better, but it was so different.
It was. He had that look, So that's going to be me now, like when I lose this hair.
Now he's got the more distinguished look going on.
Yes. More author look.
Not the hippie look.
Yeah.
I can't pull off the hippie look anymore. Those days have long.
Yeah, mine. They're getting there. So let's see if we can see it.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's going a little, but whatever. It's fine now.
Luckily, I gave in. I'm not taking it bad. Starting about 18, I started to get the little racing stripes, and they've just finally. It's like I've known it for years. It was going to happen.
Yeah, you can see here, like it's going up on either side here. So eventually. Yeah, see like that.
Yeah. My running joke with my wife is my hair is not receding, it's retreating. It's all back here.
I mean, eventually it's probably going to get to the point of where I'll just cut it short because I don't want to look like Riff Raff from Rocky Horror Picture Show. Like long hair. Yeah. Although
the reason I keep this so short now is because for whatever reason, I'm going thin up here, but this is just as thick as ever. So if I let it grow out, I start looking like Bozo the Clown. It's not a good look for anybody.
That's one of the reasons why I stopped doing the beard, because it starts growing out instead of down. So I had to brush it down, but it kept like, and the minute there was like any frizz, it just, and it was like the weirdest looking beard. So eventually I was just like, this is ridiculous. I wanted, at the time I was thinking of going fantasy author, just full-time fantasy, And so I was like, well, if I got to do that, I have to have the beard. The big beard.
It's kind of a prerequisite.
It's a must. I mean, you've got George R. R. Martin, you've got like, what's his name? Name of the Wind, Patrick Rothfuss, And so that was my frame of mind there. And yeah, I still probably will write a fantasy thing. It's one I've got like kind of working on off and on through the years because, I still like that kind of stuff. So it'll probably still come out someday, but it just didn't take. You know what I mean? It didn't take. The story just kept not taking. So eventually, it'll take.
Well,
It'll be another, hopefully not another 20 years.
yeah, but we'll be there for it, hopefully.
What's that?
We'll be there for it, hopefully.
Oh yeah, true. Oh my God, yeah. I'll be pushing the limits of our gender's like age, the medium age or whatever it is, the average.
Like I always tell people, I'm middle aged as long as I live to 104.
That's the thing. When people tell me like middle age is 50, I'm like, I don't know about that. I think my middle age was 34.
I'm guessing it's probably not going to be 104, but
that's the rear view for me. I'm like that's I'm past middle age now. I'm fine with that. I had my midlife crisis.
Yeah, no. Once I hit 50, I was pretty much like, I'm not middle aged anymore. I kind of made that joke up until 50, and I'm like, most people don't live to be 100.
No, I've got 50 is 3 years. 3 years for me. So I'm staring at it. 47 is a weird age because it's an odd number. Isn't it? It's like a very strange. And my 40s, the only thing I don't like about it is they went too fast.
Yeah, I turned 53
30
next
seemed to
month.
take forever. 30 seemed to take forever. My 40s were wonderful, but they're almost over now. And I'm like, all right. But I hear 50 is very good. The 50s.
I'm not dead yet, so that's a plus. I'm still on the right side of the ground. I look at it this way too. Is like I feel like every day as you're living it seems like it takes forever.
Mm-hmm.
But when you try to look back at that, it's like I remember when my kids don't live in the house anymore. They used to be so tiny.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's so weird because I just think about when I first started this one job I'm working on now. It was like 8 years ago. It's like, oh, that feels like nothing. And then I think about like my kids were still in elementary school, and then my daughter's away at college.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's insane, and like, yeah, it just makes no sense. It's so weird.
Sometimes I think it's how you word it though too, because like you said, I've been working here for 8 years, but then you say like I've been here for almost a decade. It's like it has a little bit of a different connotation on it.
Right, it changes things drastically, but it's true though. I was just thinking what was that? I just posted on Blue Sky, I think, just because there's no porn spam bots there, so I usually post there more often.
So far,
yeah. So I was just saying, like, 2018 wasn't that long ago. I mean, it just feels like it was long ago because of the pandemic. Oh wait, no, that was 6 years ago. When the hell did that happen? That makes no sense, but it was 6 years ago. It's crazy.
I like the current running joke. The young people like to say, "Oh, you were born in the late 1900s." Like, shut up.
My daughter does that to me all the time. I'm just like, no, but it is the late night. I'm like, no, stop it. Stop.
Technically, but it still sounds horrible.
Yeah, it sounds so weird. Late 1900s. Yeah. Born in the late 1900s. Yeah. They say that about the 80s too. I'm like, yeah. It was late 1900s, but that doesn't make it not sound like Victorian England.
Yeah. I was like, it was probably too soon, but I heard a lot of people joke about when Queen Elizabeth died, and then they were talking about something. They'd say something like, it's like, didn't you do this last week? Yeah, but that was during the Elizabethan age. like, okay, you might have wanted to wait an extra week before that joke, but I get where you're going there.
It's still a good joke, but yeah.
All right. So I've been telling you I was going to let you go for almost an hour.
Yeah, that's fine though. I love this sort of stuff.
I do too. I was like, oh my goodness. I think it's the horror authors too. I know I talked to Nat Cassidy for a long time. I talked to Ian Rogers. We talked for like an hour and a half. And then after the thing was over, we talked for like an hour and a half. I just feel like you guys are like down to earth a lot more. And it's not, everything's busy.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yeah, I found that the same thing with horror authors. They're also the nicest people, which you wouldn't think so.
Well, because I teased Ian because he's from Canada. I'm like, you're from Canada? How can you be writing horror books? You're supposed to be nice people.
Yeah, but it's funny because like every horror author I've met is like extremely nice. I mean, you get one every once in a while that is, and like, oh, I'm twisted, but whatever. I mean, we're all scaredy cats. We're writing the stuff that terrifies us. We don't write the stuff we think, ooh, this sounds like fun. Ooh. I mean, in a way,
you get that more from some of your, especially fantasy or even YA people. Those people like was it Sarah Reese Brennan? She
Mhm.
was in Omaha back when my kids were young, and I've told her about this. I was at the event when she was there, but I kind of teased her about it. The only thing I remember from that whole event, because it was her, Holly Black, and Cassandra Clare,
Mhm.
and Sarah Reese Brennan. There's like all these kids in the audience, and they're talking to her, and she said something about the fact it's like, I love making my readers cry. They're like, that's the only thing I remember from that whole thing.
Oh my gosh.
She's a trip though. I like her. She's got a new book coming out too. But yeah,
I get the
all
feeling.
right.
I get the feeling. I want to make my readers feel something.
Yes.
Yes.
Apparently, she wants them to feel pain.
Emotional, physical, whatever.
Yeah. Emotional damage. Don't let me say that again. Okay.
That's funny though.
All right. Cool. Well, I appreciate you being on.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is kind of on Twitch. Mainly, it's going to be on YouTube. Twitch is just mainly live streams, and I think the
Yeah, it's
VODs even
understandable.
go away after a while. But the YouTube is here to stay. I've already got Paul. Your website's already down there in the links. I've got
Nice.
a link to your books on Amazon, and of course, I'm also going to get a link to Warner Books down there. I just didn't know who you were going to shout out yet, so we'll
That's
put it
fine.
there later.
Yep.
But it's kind of late. I think my wife's already gone to bed, so I will probably get that all fixed up in the morning.
Okay.
She's a nurse. She's got to get up in the morning. So
No, it's understandable. Yeah.
she lets me do my thing and just like leave her out of it, and she's happy as long as I don't get too loud. Luckily, there's a living room between this bedroom and the one she's sleeping in. So, but no, I totally enjoy this. I loved your book. I'm really loving Glass House, as I said.
Mhm.
Thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you. I know you and I
Yes,
have
sir.
talked on Blue Sky a little bit. Keep in touch, and looking forward to what comes out next.
Sounds good.
All right. All right. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Bye.